Chapter 1910. Above the North Sea of the Northern Territory, two figures flew in the sky, heading towards the 100-spirit Tao peak of the Phoenix Flower 9 Islands. Qin Hao smiled and held 3 jade bottles in his hand. They contained the blood pistol pills given by the Phoenix clan elder. They were made from his blood and the phoenix tree stamen. They had the effect of calming Kuang Tang's violent emotions. They could not be lost or damaged. At this time, Qin Hao looked at Kuang Tang beside him. He recalled the scene under the phoenix tree when Qin Hao used the Great Void immortal treasure to perform the reincarnation rules of order. The Phoenix clan elder's heart was unsettled. When a martial artist's great Tao was flawed, extraordinary pills and techniques could fix it. Only the divine Tao could make up for it. As expected, the Phoenix clan elder was tempted. As the elder brother and the Phoenix clan elder, how could he bear to see his younger brother live like a madman for the rest of his life? After witnessing the power of Qin Hao's divine Tao and feeling the supreme divine Tao intent, the Phoenix clan elder made the decision to let Qin Hao take Kuang Tang away from the clan. Although I couldn't get the Phoenix clan elder to come out, it's not bad. Qin Hao smiled. He was satisfied with Kuang Tang's strength. After all, he had fought with him before and knew what to expect. The Phoenix clan elder also admitted that in terms of talent, Kuang Tang was definitely stronger than him. This was something that the entire Phoenix God clan agreed with. "Why are you staring at me?" Kuang Tang trimmed his hair slightly and changed into a set of clean and decent clothes. He was a guest at the 100-spirit island and naturally had to take care of himself to prevent the East Continent's emperors from mocking the Phoenix clan. Sensing Qin Hao's gaze, Kuang Tang raised his head and glared at him. This person had been looking at him strangely the entire time. Was there something wrong with him? "Tang, your elder brother asked me to take care of you, so we have to make some things clear." Qin Hao cleared his throat and spoke in a dignified manner. "Don't worry, I'll listen to you. I'll beat up whoever you ask me to." Kuang Tang knew what Qin Hao meant. He followed him to be his fighter. Qin Hao was startled. He looked at Kuang Tang with some astonishment. Kuang Tang's intelligence didn't seem to be wrong. He was very reasonable. "I was born without a part of my spiritual sense, causing my mind to be in chaos. When I go crazy, I can't control myself. Also, I don't feel pain. I'm not stupid." Crazy Tang protested. Crazy was crazy, but he wasn't an idiot. "Don't look at him like that." Oh, sorry." Qin Hao hurriedly apologized. He had only interacted with Kuang Tang for a short period of time, so he didn't understand Kuang Tang well enough. It turned out that Kuang Tang was quite normal when he wasn't acting up. This made things easier. Qin Hao was afraid that Kuang Tang would act up randomly and get out of hand. That would undoubtedly mean bringing a dangerous person into Bai Ling. In fact, Kuang Tang's situation wasn't too bad. He had fought with Qin Hao because of the divine parasol tree in his possession. Kuang Tang had special feelings for the divine parasol tree. The parasol tree's aura could calm him down, especially the stamen of the parasol tree, which innately made him want to protect it. When he saw an outsider holding the parasol tree, he didn't hesitate to seize it. The two of them headed toward Bai Ling Tao Peak at a constant speed. After traveling for 2 months, they left the territory of the Phoenix clan. Qin Hao secretly met with Monarch Mo Luo and Mo Xian. Mo Xian had refined the void chain into a monarch spirit. After more than 20 years, his ability had improved a lot and he had reached the realm of true self. Now, he didn't know how the situation was at Bai Ling Tao Peak. Everyone had entered the Tao world to cultivate and whether their strength had improved. Qin Hao was looking forward to it. After safely passing through the territory of the Daqin Empire, Qin Hao brought Kuang Tang back to Bai Ling Tao Peak. Currently, in the formation realm of Bai Ling Tao Peak, the members of various forces and their descendants were in full swing. Ever since Saint Emperor Jiang, Ancestor Li, Ancestor Daohai, Feng Lan, and Wei Wei entered the array, the cultivators had changed again and again. the remaining island masters of the Phoenix Flower sect, as well as several former island masters and elders. Bao Lianhan, Sikong Shu, Zhongli Qing, and Wenninglan were the first seats of the 9 branches. Among them, except for Bao, they were all monarch masters. This included the second seats of the 9 branches, Zhu Xing, and the others. The outstanding disciples of the Phoenix Flower sect entered the array one after another, especially Shi Dong of the Dao sect, the Shua clan of the East Sea, the fairies of the Aqua Jade Palace, Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and Qin Yun. Many geniuses gathered at Bai Ling Dao Peak and launched an extremely grand cultivation atmosphere. It also spurred the ordinary disciples of the 3 major orthodoxies to cultivate crazily. In addition, many people from western Liang, the northern border, and the southern region were still on their way. Because of the long journey and the large scale, they arrived a little late. In this battle, Qin Hao showed his determination to cut off all means of retreat. If he failed, many people would be drowned in the chaos of war. The overlords of the 5 realms in the East Continent felt the cultivation aura of the North Territory. This matter could not be hidden from the eyes of the monarchs of the 5 realms. Imperceptibly, the atmosphere in the East Continent became more and more tense with the arrival of people from the 3 realms. Everyone had a feeling that a storm was coming. The North Territory was clearly preparing for war. The orthodoxies gathered together because of Dendi. He was preparing to attack the Sunset Peak and compete with the Sunset War God. Under the impetus of the general trend, the East Continent, which was already in a tense atmosphere, continued to fight among the various forces. Although most of the fights were between the second-rate and third-rate sect, it still intensified the division of the East Continent. Chaos. The 5 realms were in chaos. The Juying Sword Palace and the Thunder Pool Palace in the Middle Territory suddenly built a teleportation array that connected to the North Territory. Their masters and disciples all poured into Bai Ling Dao Peak through the array. Half a month later, Bai Yueshuan's entire clan left. They abandoned their ancestral land and rushed to Bai Ling Dao Peak to become the overlord of the North Territory. The leader of the South Territory's Sacred Sword Wind People, the Wind Ancestor, along with the Celestial Cliffs Patriarch, personally went to Sunset Peak to ask for the protection of the Sunset War God. They were willing to lead their entire clan to obey the War God and listen to his orders. The remnants of the Ghost Baron Nation, Divine Herbalist Valley, Divine Firmament Hall, and many other overlords and first-rate forces submitted to Empress Ling Xian of Daqin. Empress Ling Xian's imperial flag floated above the territories of these former overlords. Other than orthodoxies like the Vajra Institute and Jixia Academy, the entire East Continent was in chaos. The 5 realms were in chaos and everyone was in danger. Every day, there would be overlord forces rushing to the North Territory, Sunset Peak, and Daqin Empire. Even the Ludao nation across the sea was restless. Unknowingly, the 5 realms of the East Continent had evolved into a tripartite balance of power. Under the crushing force of the general trend, no force could stay out of it. Everyone was following the trend. The various overlords had bet their fates on one of the 3 giants. It was up to them to see who would be the final winner of this gamble. At this time, on Bai Ling Dao Peak, strong rays of light surged. The Dao Peak had expanded dozens of times from its original foundation. Even so, it still could not meet the needs of cultivation. Now that the popularity of Bai Ling Dao Peak has far surpassed that of Phoenix Flower Island, it's time to change the leader of this island. In the Dao Hall, a row of figures stood there, overlooking the dense crowd of disciples below. Each of these figures had an extraordinary temperament. They were the grand ancestors of the various overlords. Feng Lan was wearing a graceful and noble sovereign robe, exuding the majesty of an empress. She kept shaking her head and chuckling. She was considering whether to give up the position of sovereign and let Yun Ro take over. "I'm afraid this is exactly what you want," Bai Di, the grand ancestor of Bai Yuexian, said with a smile. From his face, Baidi was a handsome middle-aged man, exuding a scholarly aura. It's been 5 years, and there's been no movement from Sunset Peak. If this continues, Bailing City will be overcrowded. Lei Chuan, the second hall master of the Judgment Hall, said, his eyes full of envy. Now Dao Sect, Immortal Sect, Shua Clan, Sword Palace, Judgment Hall, and many other overlords had gathered in the city. Even this group of old men had gathered together. Looking around, such a grand scene could only be compared to the imperial banquet held by Qin Hao 600 years ago. When would the Judgment Hall be able to usher in such glory? Daoist High, I'll have to trouble you and Emperor Bai to cast a spell to strengthen the island. In the center of the Emperor's, Qin Hao's silver hair fluttered as he stood with his hands behind his back. Indeed, there were too many people. If this continued, even if the experts of the various sects restrained their Emperor Qi, it would affect the foundation of the island. If they were not careful, the island could sink. Now, there were more than 300 emperors on the island, and the number was still rising. It was no joke. If any emperor did not control it well, it could cause a sea change. All right. Ancestor Daoist High nodded and looked at Ancestor Bai Yuexian. The two turned into dazzling Emperor Qi and soared into the sky. Soon, a tremor came from the Dao Hall. They began to build the island and expand the land area. Ancestor Daoist High was good at this. With Emperor Bai's help, it was not difficult to turn the ascending valley into land. When are you going to move? Feng Lan looked at Qin Hao and asked. 5 years. It was far beyond expectations. Sunset Peak was very quiet. Even if the Sunset Battle Immortal already knew that Dendu was here, he was still calm. Of course, this was also related to the situation. The power gathered around Qin Hao was not something the Battle Immortal Guards could easily touch. He's waiting for me to take the initiative. Qin Hao's expression was very calm. Zhan Wu's intention was very clear after not taking action for 5 years. Sunset Peak has the terrain. Even if there is no one who is good at array Dao, the Sunset Battle Immortal still has an advantage. Zhuing Sword Emperor said, "What about you? How long more do you need to prepare?" "Wait a little longer." Qin Hao replied, "Wait for old Jiang, Ancestor Li, and the others." After 5 years, no one had successfully broken through the first level of perfected true self. Although the strong cultivators on 100 Spirits Island were enough to compete with the Battle Immortal Guards, Qin Hao still wanted to accumulate more strength. After all, no one could retreat from this battle. It was not easy to merge with the Heavenly Way and reach the flawless Emperor intent. Of course, it was not too difficult. Li Xiuxing, Ancestor Daoist High, Emperor Bai Weiwei, Feng Lan, and Crazed Tang all had the qualifications to enter the flawless realm. It was just that their Emperor intent could not be opened. If any of them entered the flawless path, Qin Hao would dare to directly attack Sunset Peak. At this moment, above the dojo below, a beam of light suddenly flew out from a formation realm. In an instant, the void tribulation clouds wandered. Huge bolts of lightning tore apart and extended. It was a natural phenomenon. An Emperor Tribulation descended. Emperor Tribulation of True Self. It's that junior from Shiliang. Zhuing looked at Qin Hao and said, "Congratulations." Qin Hao smiled. He did not expect that after Wuk, the second person to enter the Emperor realm of True Self would be Su Jin. It was indeed worthy of celebration. Chapter 1911. Su Jin's talent was not bad to begin with, and after entering the Divine Palace and receiving the teachings of the Yao Guang Deity Lord, he learned the best sound Emperor technique. In the past 20 years, he had been cultivating in the Medicine Valley and improved rapidly. He had long become an emperor. Today, using the power of the Matrix to break through the True Self Imperial Gate, everything was logical. At this time, an incomparably vast tribulation cloud was brewing, and doomsday-like scenes shrouded the void of 100 Spirit Peak. The aura of heaven's might descended, and rays of light of catastrophe spread out. Su Jin rose into the sky in his white robe, and the light of music floated around him as he took the initiative to withstand the great path Emperor Tribulation. Boom! Crack! A deafening roar exploded. Everyone looked up and saw a beam of blinding light of catastrophe of the great path falling down, blasting towards Su Jin's imperial body. Su Jin emptied his spiritual consciousness and entered a state of vacuum, opening himself up to the baptism of the great path Emperor Tribulation. Only through the power of the heavenly path Emperor Tribulation could he forge a stronger Emperor spirit. On his body, dense threads of light of catastrophe wandered, and his skin was being cut and torn apart. The power of the great path Emperor Tribulation poured into his flesh and blood, destroying wildly, mixed with an extremely terrifying destructive power. Su Jin silently endured the great path Emperor Tribulation. This terrifying power could destroy him, but it could also make him stronger. What he needed to do was to break through his own limit. Countless people looked up and watched with shocked eyes as a true self-great emperor went through the tribulation. There were 4 levels of the imperial path, 36 tribulations, and 3 tribulations of the true self. Naturally, Su Jin successfully endured the first emperor tribulation. Then, the light of catastrophe became bigger and bigger, turning into a pillar of light that reached the sky. The power of the great path radiated for thousands of miles, and it fell heavily from the tribulation cloud. Su Jin still did not resist. He endured the power of the tribulation entering his body, refining his soul and strengthening his flesh and blood. Although his imperial body was torn apart and filled with a large amount of blood, an extremely shocking aura was slowly born from his seemingly severely injured body. It was as if the blood that flew out were impurities of the great path that were expelled from his body by the power of the tribulation. Buzz! The huge tribulation cloud rotated, and in the surging light, a figure suddenly descended. His body shape and appearance were exactly the same as Su Jin's, condensed by the will of the heavenly path. This figure's temperament was unparalleled, and he played a flute. Immediately, the sound of the heavenly path radiated down, rushing into Su Jin's ears, as if trying to destroy his soul. At this moment, Su Jin finally moved. Just like when Meng Xiang went through the tribulation all those years ago, his empty spiritual sense and will of the Emperor suddenly exploded. His body was wrapped in a strong light of the Emperor, and he also played on the flute. The sound waves of the great path radiated out and the void roared. It interweaved with the sound of the tribulation that was pressing down and affected the figure condensed by the will of the heavens. Many people present couldn't understand it, and they only felt that the nature of these two sounds were completely different. The suppressive sound of the heavenly Tao was filled with destruction, whereas the melody played by Su Jin gurgled, and it was very pleasant to hear. It was like a flowing stream, yet it contained a continuous and boundless might. Be with. Soon, with a loud shattering sound, the will figure above Su Jin's head collapsed and dissipated, along with the sound waves of the heavenly path heavens that suppressed everything. The vast tribulation cloud that enveloped Hundred Spirit Path Peak also slowly faded from everyone's sight, and the scene returned to its original state. At this time, Emperor Su Jin's body was extremely bright, and his golden imperial chi was even more sacred. A ring of great path light appeared behind his head, making him look like a celestial being. Congratulations, Emperor Su! Congratulations, Senior Su, for successfully passing the tribulation. Amazing! At this time, the entire 100 Spirit Path Peak burst into cheers. The emperors of the various forces, as well as their disciples, saw Su Jin easily resist the heavenly path Emperor Tribulation and forge his imperial true body, and they all congratulated him. Su Jin was indeed powerful. Emperor Bai, Samsara, Shadowless, Hyuning, and many other emperors of the previous generation felt that they were inferior to him. When they passed the true self-emperor tribulation, it was not an exaggeration to say that they had narrowly escaped death. On the other hand, Su Jin seemed to have the entire process of passing the tribulation under his control. This kind of calmness was really admirable and admirable. Big brother, I succeeded. Su Jin dispersed the Emperor's ring of the Great Path and landed beside Qin Hao with bloodstains. After successfully passing the tribulation, he came to find someone to share his joy with, and so he came to find Qin Hao. Not bad. Qin Hao nodded and said with a smile instead of praise. Su Jin's skills were all taught by Yao Guang Deity Lord, and he had also been tempered by the Hidden Path Spirit Waterfall and the Xiantian Furnace Cave. The Divine Palace disciples naturally had an easier time passing the tribulation than the emperors of the outside world. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Immediately afterward, one after another, rays of Emperor's light penetrated the matrix orb. Before the crowd could recover from the joy of Su Jin's success, an even more shocking scene followed. As far as the eye could see, in the sky above the dojo, one figure after another stood there, glowing with an extremely strong Emperor's light. All of them were of the same color, and their auras were all perfected. Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, Qin Wanqin, Shuo Xiu, Hai Sha, and Qi Yuan had all stepped into the Emperor realm. This, in an instant, the entire peak fell into absolute silence. The emperors and disciples of the various forces were all stunned, as if they had seen something unbelievable. This time, a total of 6 emperors were born at the same time, in the same place. It was a spectacular sight, a historical moment. In the past, there had never been a scene like this in the East Continent. One by house, however, Xiaogua and the others did not attract the tribulation of the Great Path when they became emperors. When Renhuangs became emperors, they would experience 36 tribulations. The emperors who had become emperors had perfected their rules and will, so they would not attract the second major tribulation of the emperor's path. Even so, it still made it difficult for the various forces to calm down. It was simply a miracle. Ha ha, today is really a good day. Qin Hao smiled happily, looking at the 6 people in the sky above the dojo. Although Shuihan, Wanqin, and the others were a little slower, they were still perfected and would definitely play a certain role in the upcoming battle. Qin Hao did not expect them to create a great battle record. He only hoped that they could protect themselves in the chaotic battle. That was enough. Donger, Bauer Zhuxing, and the others will be here soon. The Great Elder appeared beside Qin Hao. Senior, you've worked hard these past few years, Qin Hao said emotionally. The Great Elder took at least half of the credit for the 100-spirit Tao Peak being as grand as it was today. Moreover, Bauer had also become the last disciple of the Great Elder. Basically, she was the only successor before the Great Elder's time came. As for Qin Hao, he had only used the name of Dendi to gather everyone together. In the chaos of the divine wilderness, he had fought for a chance to survive for everyone. He had not made any contributions. Unfortunately, there is still no one who has reached the unblemished realm. The Great Elder shook his head. The unblemished realm was not difficult, but it was not easy either. It relied on a warrior's state of mind and the Tao of Heaven. Shouwuk was an exception. In the battle with Patriarch Ning, his method was especially extreme. He sought the Tao with his death. If he failed, he would die. This method was not suitable for others. Moreover, the people who crossed the sea might not dare to do it because it was not something that anyone could succeed. Senior, I want to go into seclusion for a few years. I'll have to trouble you to lead the matters here, Qin Hao said. Bo Changji narrowed his eyes and looked at him. No one had reached the unblemished realm. The combat strength of this realm was always one level lower than the Sunset Peak. This was a variable. Any unblemished realm cultivator would trigger a great battle. He knew that Qin Hao was under pressure. Go. I can feel that you still have room for improvement before you reach nirvana. It's good to train yourself, the great elder said. The commander of this battle was naturally Dendi. Moreover, Qin Hao was the only one who could compete with the sunset battle god. If he could not defeat the sunset battle god, this battle would be meaningless. Feng Lan, after I go into seclusion, I'll leave everything to you and the great elder, Qin Hao instructed Phoenix Flower Prime. Okay, we'll wait for you to come out of seclusion, Feng Lan said. Qin Hao nodded and turned back to the temple. He needed to temper the rules and imperial methods that he had mastered. Qin Hao had two forms of the divine path. The first was the path of endless samsara left behind by Yenming, the dragon man. The strongest profound meaning of this path was the power of the rules. The second was the 3 souls and 2 rules, which could be integrated into imperial methods and martial technique. In terms of offensive power, the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace's unique skills were mainly the 9 Palace War Emperor art and the Dao Zong Hua spiritual art. Then, his own unique skills, such as the Golden Finger, the Rainbow Sword technique, and the Fleetfoot Step, also needed to be further softened with imperial methods and rules to try to create more powerful imperial technique. There was also the Sunset Archery technique. In addition to the technique, the art of archery also included mental cultivation method. The arrow Crimson Red had been nurtured by Xiaohan, and now it was in the hands of Qin Hao. In addition, Zhan Wu had 2 other arrows that were no less powerful than Crimson Red. Moreover, the Sunset Bow was also there. Qin Hao's second form of the divine path was the extreme evil body. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he didn't want to use this power to avoid becoming dependent on it. The extreme evil body was too vicious and overbearing. It was the way of seizing the way. The moment it was used, it was destined to end. Even at present, he had not completely mastered it. He still needed to rely on the demonic matrix gathered by the 10 Seas to release it. In this seclusion, Qin Hao would bring Xiaohan with him. The 2 of them were proficient in imperial methods to try to increase the power of Crimson Red. In a secluded secret room in the 100 Spirits Temple. Are you ready? Qin Hao sat on the ground and meditated, looking at Xiaohan. Yes. Xiaohan nodded, looking slightly nervous. Recently, she had been accompanying Bao as well as Xiao Yi, Tang Dingtian, and the others who had rushed over from the northern border. Therefore, she didn't focus on cultivating in the formation orb like Weiwei. We've gone through many life and death situations. We can also go through this battle. Qin Hao reached out his warm hand and held Xiaohan's palm. Xiaohan felt the warmth from him, and her nervous expression relaxed a little. She closed her eyes, and a layer of Emperor's Qi swirled around her. The red light on her body grew more and more intense. Suddenly, there was an ear-piercing sound, and a sharp arrow radiance materialized from her body, floating between the 2 of them. Crimson Setting Sun was the first arrow that Qin Hao had refined with his blood essence in his previous life. This arrow was also the one with the most blood among the 3 divine arrows. It had a powerful shattering effect, and could directly penetrate an emperor's body. Red Dian was the second divine arrow that Qin Hao had refined after Crimson Red. Red Dian wasn't as sturdy as Crimson Red, but because it was nourished by Dao intent, it had the power to kill souls. Even if it didn't hit its target, it could still kill with Dao intent. Back then, if Zhan Wu had used Red Dian to attack Weiwei, she probably wouldn't have been able to hold out until Qin Hao broke into the Luoshui catacombs. The third arrow was called Banestone. Qin Hao didn't have its special abilities. Not long after he had refined the arrow, he had stepped into the god-slaying formation. Therefore, he didn't have much time or opportunity to strengthen this arrow. However, it was unknown whether Zhan Wu had integrated his Dao intent into Banestone. Qin Hao only had Crimson Red. Chapter 1912. In the vast North Sea, a ferocious ancient dragon whale was traveling on the water. Its sovereign lord-level aura spread out. On its enormous body, which was the size of an island, stood a slim and graceful woman. The woman and the dragon whale followed the familiar path silently, gradually leaving the 100-spirit path peak. The shocking battle between the North Territory and the Sunset Peak would erupt overnight. Bauer felt that she should bid farewell to the honest uncle because no one knew what the final outcome of this battle would be. Perhaps many people would die. Even Bauer, who was Denda's daughter, might die. I haven't seen Uncle in 5 years. I hope that this time it won't be forever. Bauer muttered silently. With the return of the Elixir Emperor, there were more and more experts on the Bai Ling Dao Peak in recent years. Even Qin Shilong, the great elder of the Qin clan in the western Liang, and Xiao Wudi from the northern borderline came. There were countless uncles and elders, and Bauer could not recognize all of them. In the past, she'd always felt that she was lonely. But now, when facing so many clansmen, 7th aunt, 8th aunt, 3rd uncle, 6th master, and numerous brothers and sisters of the same generation, the waves of enthusiasm that could topple mountains and overturn seas caused her to feel suffocated, and it caused her to slightly miss the tranquility of the past. Bauer was not disgusted by this. On the contrary, it made her very happy. She felt the warmth of a big family, but she could not accept it for a while. There were too many people. Uncle is a very powerful person. It would be great if he could participate in this battle. Bauer thought of the simple figure watering the plants and smiled. But she knew that with the uncle's personality, he would not be on the same side as the North Territory's emperors. The uncle was an expert who had seen through the mortal world and loved peace. His character was more noble than Dendi and the sunset battle god. It was a pity that such an unparalleled expert missed the most eye-catching heavenly battle in the divine wilderness continent. It was a pity. If the uncle was willing, he should be able to shine like Dendi and the sunset battle god, be respected by the warriors of the 4 regions, and be remembered forever in history. The dragon whale was very fast. Before long, it had brought Bao to the most remote part of the North Sea. This place felt like the border of the sea. The sky was gray, and there was a strange power of the great path that connected to the sea. It was as if one could cross it and go to another world. However, when Bauer arrived here today, she no longer saw the dense sea fog. As far as the eye could see, the surface of the sea was clear and the air was astonishingly pure. Uncle Long, did you run to the wrong place? Bauer frowned and revealed a puzzled expression. This place was completely different from the last time she had been here. The landmarks of the entire northern region are imprinted in my mind. They're as solid as bones in my flesh. There's no way I'd make a mistake. The dragon whale let out a deep and resonant human voice. Floating on the surface of the water, the dragon whale scanned the surrounding area with its pair of scary, ferocious eyes. They had all disappeared. Not only had the sea fog that had shrouded the sea disappeared, even the nearby reefs had disappeared without a trace. Strange. Could it be that he remembered wrongly? Roar. The dragon whale plunged into the depths of the sea. Its huge body swayed as it circled the nearby seabed a few times. Then, it returned to the surface of the sea. As a strong light flashed in the air, it transformed into an abnormally strong, burly, and 3-meter-tall middle-aged man. He floated in the air beside Bao and said, "There's no mistake. This is indeed the place where the master lived." But, Bao looked around. How could the medicine island disappear? "Girl, use your fire spirit eye to check," the dragon whale said. Bauer nodded. Her bright eyes gradually lit up with fiery patterns. She looked around again, but she still could not feel the slightest bit of the aura of the enchantment. The surface of the sea was empty, and the land had indeed disappeared. "It seems that the master has left." Uncle Long knew the answer when he saw the disappointment on Bao's face. "But why didn't he tell me? Even if it's not convenient for him to come to 100 Spirits Island, he should have left something here. It's so worrisome." Bao's eyes were red. Uncle Long was her only friend. Without saying a word, without leaving a single word, he left just like that. Perhaps there's something he can't say. Uncle Long patted Bao Er's shoulder and said, "Let's go back." The master's actions were always difficult to predict. It was impossible to find him unless he was willing. "I'll remember this. Don't let me find him. Otherwise, I'll use the lightning technique he taught me to blast him 3,000 times. Humph! Bao Er stepped on the ground. Then, the dragon whale entered the sea and transformed into its original form. One person and one beast left in the direction they came from. At this moment, on the first peak of the divine wilderness, at the peak of the setting sun, in the war god temple, Zhan Wu, dressed in a simple green robe, stood on the highest peak of the temple. He looked up at the North Territory. His gaze pierced through the boundless void. His eyes slowly reflected the backs of the two leaving figures. "Bao Er, uncle is waiting for you and your father here." Zhan Wu chuckled. "Blast him 3,000 times with the lightning technique. There will be a chance. You seem to be more attentive to her than Lu. Now I wonder if Bao Er is Qin Hao's daughter or your daughter." Zhuge Xiu held a bottle of jade wine in her hand and lay on the ground. She opened her mouth with an intoxicated expression. She was happily pouring wine down her throat without restraint. The clothes in front of her chest were wet. "Get lost," Zhan Wu scolded with a sullen face. "Jokes shouldn't be made. Godfather, you released the fake news that this pig was seriously injured so that Dendu would think that the War God Temple's combat power was damaged. Aren't you afraid that Han Lingxian will take the opportunity to attack the Sunset Peak?" Zhan Lu said. The Battle of Xianlong Mountain had confirmed that the Emperor of Xianlong was one of the villains back then. His cultivation was extremely high. Unfortunately, he was still lacking if he wanted to seriously injure Zhuge Xiu. Zhuge Xiu was actually not injured. But in this way, it would create an opportunity for Han Lingxian to attack. Facing the attack of the North Territory and Daqin, even if the War God Temple's War God Guards were all martial arts geniuses, they would definitely not be able to resist. What will come, but there is one thing. Before the outcome between Dendi and I is decided, Han Lingxian will not be stupid enough to appear directly in front of us. Zhan Wu knew this woman very well. Daqin would wait for the snipe and the clam to fight and then gain the advantage. Now it was a gamble. A gamble on whether Qin Hao could enter the divine path before Han Lingxian came. "Boss, you really don't treat us as human beings." Zhuge Xiu smiled sadly. In this battle, the fate of the three commanders seemed to have been destined to be reduced to ashes. "If Qin Hao becomes a god, you will also become a god." Zhan Wu's gaze was extremely firm. "But if he doesn't become a god, we will all die with him." Zhuge Xiu's eyes were red. "If you don't want to, you can leave." After waiting for 600 years and being reborn 3 times, Zhan Wu could not give up at this time. "Haha, you know, since the moment you avenged my family for me, my life has already belonged to the Sunset War God. In this battle, I will fight according to your arrangement until the end." Zhuge Xiu stood up and said. His original intention had never changed. "Then don't talk nonsense with me. You and Lu can leave now. Go." Zhan Wu waved at the two. "Boss, take care." Zhuge Xiu knelt on one knee. His flawless breath was hidden in the great path, and his figure slowly disappeared. No one knew where he went. "Godfather, take care," Zhan Lu said. Like Zhuge Xiu, he also left Sunset Peak silently. Next, it would become the battlefield of the Divine Martial Hall and Kuei Han. Zhan Lu hoped that in this battle, his godfather could fulfill his wish of thousands of years. Chapter 1913. North Territory, 100 Spirits Dao Peak. After the expansion, the island was several times larger than its original size. Along with this, the dojo set up a few more formation orbs. Although the formation orbs set up later were not as powerful as the ones set up by Qin Hao and the Dao ancestor, they were enough to help cultivators below the Emperor Dao of True Self hone their Dao. Another 6 years had passed since Qin Hao went into seclusion. 6 years was not a short time for ordinary people, but in the cultivation world, especially in front of Emperor Dao experts, it was just a snap of the fingers. During this process, several elders from the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect, White Lunar Pavilion, Sword Palace, and Immortal Sect entered the Emperor realm with the help of the formation orbs. However, there was still no one who was unblemished. There wasn't even anyone who had stepped onto the path of true self. Su Jin was the only one. The cultivation of the Emperor Dao was about the state of mind, Dao, and heavenly harmony. There were 4 thresholds, and it was not easy to cross each one. However, the cultivation techniques and martial techniques of the experts of the various factions had improved. At least, under the training of the formation orbs, their Emperor Dao and rules had increased a lot, and they were more powerful than before. In the 100 Spirits Dao Hall, Qin Hao and Xiao Han were also cultivating. After reviewing the Emperor Dao that they were good at, the 2 of them spent more time on the Scarlet Arrow. This arrow was one of the 3 sunset arrows. Because he did not control the divine Dao in his previous life, the Scarlet Arrow that Qin Hao condensed with his blood essence could not be considered a true divine artifact. Now, his indestructible samsara technique had reached the 9th level, and his laws had risen to the 5th level. He was trying to use the power of laws to refine the Scarlet Arrow into a true divine artifact. In theory, it was possible. After all, the Scarlet Arrow was not made of ordinary materials. It was condensed from Qin Hao's blood essence and resonated with his own Dao. All his rules and Emperor Dao could provide the Scarlet Arrow with more power. However, in reality, Qin Hao found that it was impossible. This Scarlet Arrow still needed to be powered by the Sunset Heart Sutra to release the power of the Sunset Divine Arrow. Apart from that, he could at most fuse laws and rules into the Sunset Heart Sutra to increase the power of the arrow, but he could not completely change the nature of the arrow. In other words, Qin Hao's divine Dao power could not forge a divine artifact. Perhaps this had something to do with his reincarnation, because the crimson-red arrow originally belonged to Qin Hao in his previous life, and because he did not have the heart of the forgotten sunset, he could control this arrow. He wanted to use the will of Dao in this life to modify it, but he could not do so. Forcefully condensing it might destroy the scarlet red. Qin Hao had no choice but to give up in the end. However, during this period of seclusion, he did sense a shocking abnormality from Xiao Han. Her body contained an extremely domineering power that actually did not fear the pressure of the laws of samsara. This power seemed to be extremely similar to the divine way, or it might even be the divine way. This caused Qin Hao to be rather shocked in his heart, and a bold guess arose in his heart. Perhaps Han Er's background isn't as simple as it seems on the surface, and there might be a shocking secret behind the Northern Territories' Princess Jingyue. This secret might have something to do with the dead crown princess. Could it be that his mother-in-law was not from the divine wilderness continent? When he had this thought, Qin Hao was also shocked by himself. However, he did not say anything, nor did he directly ask Xiao Han. All of this needed to be settled with Zhan Wu first. Divine Wilderness Calendar, Year 14026. A total of 31 years had passed since the opening of the God Burial Ruins. On this day, the 5 realms of the East Continent were all shaken. A beam of light shot up from the North Territory, piercing through the clouds for thousands of miles and reaching the sky. In an instant, a mighty heavenly might descended, and a terrifying light of calamity covered the entire North Territory. A figure stood between heaven and earth, as majestic as a god. Monstrous Tao will converged into the great Tao, blending with the heavenly Tao, breaking through the true self and becoming flawless. Finally, the unparalleled battle that would decide the fate of the divine wilderness continent had arrived. On this day, the 100 Spirit Path Peak, which was filled with emperors, came out in full force. As far as the eye could see, An army of countless experts came out of the North Territory, pointing their swords at the peak of the setting sun. Has this moment finally arrived? South Territory, Vajra Institute, the master of the Vajra Institute, a Buddha whose body seemed to be made of pure gold, sat in the sky with a dignified look. His eyes were staring at the East Territory, and his heart was pounding as he sensed the overwhelming pressure coming from there. Dendi and the setting sun battle god, two peerless rulers of two generations, were about to enter the battle of fate. Master! Master! Below him, the monks of the Vajra Institute wore solemn expressions. Even though they were not willing to participate in the battle, as a place of Buddhism in the East Continent, how could they possibly stay out of it? After all, they were not gods. They were just a speck of dust in the mortal world. Amitba, the master of the Vajra Institute, chanted with compassion and said, "Let's go, monks, come with me." Yes. Burly monks rose into the sky one after another. Thousands of monks gathered together, emitting a dignified Buddhist glow. Under the lead of the master, they headed to the East Territory from the South Territory. At this moment, the Vajra Institute became an empty temple. The East Territory, the 7-Star Herb Institute and Jixia Academy, the 3 vice-deans of the Herb Institute and the 4 palace highnesses of the Jixia Academy were standing side by side. The 7 of them were emitting powerful monarch glows as they stared at the towering mountain. "It's here," the Herb Institute said. He closed his eyes. He could clearly sense the great power that was pressing down on the Eastern Territory from the north. It was too strong. Many famous martial monarchs were present, including a few of their old friends, such as the ocean-stomping progenitor, the White Emperor, and the Juying Sword Monarch. "What do you think?" Old man Taya carried an ancient sword on his back and said sternly. It was unlikely that the 7-Star Herb Institute and Jixia Academy would be able to stay out of the battle. "Let's watch the battle. That bald donkey from the South Territory is here too. Let's see what the monk's decision is." The head of the medicine institution said. No faction would be able to survive the tide. They had to choose a side. Otherwise they would be destroyed. However, they would not easily side with either Dendi or the divine god of battle before the situation was clear. After all, they would be doomed if they chose the wrong side. The West Territory, the Miao clan, the Poison Dao family. The Warring States Kim people. The Vajra Institution in the South Territory. The leaders of the 7-Star Herb Institute, Jixia Academy, and the Middle Territory forces all rushed to the Sunset Peak. Not only the overlord forces, but even the first-rate, second-rate, and third-rate forces, as well as countless itinerant cultivators, could feel the desolate aura coming from the North Territory. Everyone was heading over to watch the battle. After all, the next battle would determine the fate of the martial arts in the Divine Wilderness. At this moment, on the Sunset Peak, Zhan Wu also stood up from his divine throne. He was no longer wearing his plain green robes. Instead, he was wearing a set of mighty divine armor that shone with boundless radiance. The moment he donned the divine armor, he truly looked like the ruthless sunset war god. Looking at the 4 divine generals waiting quietly in the main hall, the sunset battle god said, "Let's go and meet Dendi. You have also waited too long for this day." Hearing this, the 4 fully armed figures, whose faces were covered by helmets, trembled at the same time as if they could not restrain the excitement in their hearts. Then, the 4 unblemished divine martial hall followed the footsteps of the sunset battle god, and walked out of the hall. Outside the hall, the entire Sunset Peak was filled with battle god guards floating in the air. The 30,000 divine guards were all here, like an invincible army of the heavenly courts gathered together. Chapter 1914. The war drums thundered and shook the heavens. An incomparably strong murderous aura made one's blood boil. The 30,000 divine guards' armor shone brightly as they surrounded the Sunset Peak. Their mighty military might filled the air with monstrous battle intent. In front of them was Kuei Han, the commander of the Sunset Peak. He wore a set of incomparably arrogant green armor. 2 extremely sharp spikes protruded from his shoulders. His golden cloak swayed in the wind, and he didn't wear any protective gear on his head. Under his bloodthirsty eyes, the corners of his mouth curled into a cruel arc. He stared straight at the North Territory, exuding a wild aura. There were a few Emperor Lords with powerful auras standing beside him. The South Territory's Sacred Sword Wind People, Ancestor Wind. The Celestial Cliffs, Ancestor Wuya. And the Crown Prince Ning Wu, Ning Tianxing, who had destroyed the Empire. In addition, there was another figure who was particularly domineering. He had a head full of white hair, and his messy beard was almost tangled with his hair. Only a pair of sharp eyes were exposed on his face. Blood vessels spread in his eyes, making him look very deranged. Along with this, the murderous aura emanating from this figure grew stronger and stronger. Like Kuei Han, he stared straight in the direction of the North Territory, as if he couldn't wait to rush up and directly plunge into the army commanded by Dendi and kill in all directions. This person was the ancestor of the Southern Territory's Xianyuan royal family, Xianyuan Wutian. A single mistake caused the death of my Xianyuan children. Today, I will let Qin Hao have a taste of his own medicine. Xianyuan Wutian's resentful eyes grew more and more bloodshot. He almost couldn't suppress it and was about to go berserk. Back then, because he had sensed a wisp of Denda's aura on the Southern Territory's coiling dragon peak, he had ordered Xianyuan Gaoyan to send people to investigate and immediately rush to the East Continent to meet with the Sunset War God. Xianyuan Wutian believed that the Sunset War God should know about the 12 villains. He had to contact the leader of the 12 villains so that he could get rid of Qin Hao. Moreover, even if Zhan Wu didn't know that he had taken Denda's Sunset Peak, they were still on the same side. However, after he arrived, Zhan Wu delayed again and again, refusing to divulge the information about the other villains until he learned that the Xianyuan Imperial City in the southern domain had been breached and his entire clan had been wiped out by Dendi. On that day, Xianyuan Wutian's roar reverberated back and forth in the cultivation room of Sunset Peak for half a month. There was nothing he could do to change the outcome, nor did he know why Zhan Wu had trapped him. The only thing he could do was to cultivate day and night, waiting for the opportunity to take revenge. Finally, the day he had been waiting for had arrived. If you want to die faster, you can rush up now. I guarantee that you won't even be able to see Qin Hao's face. You'll be immediately torn apart by the 6 flawless experts under his command, not even leaving a trace of your flesh. Zhan Wu's tall and burly figure appeared beside Xianyuan Wutian. The 4 flawless great emperors of the divine martial hall stared at him coldly. 4 flawless great emperors shrouded him. Xianyuan Wutian couldn't help but tremble and laugh strangely. Indeed, he hadn't completely stepped onto the Emperor's path of truth. How could he be qualified to take revenge on Dendi? He still had to rely on the Sunset War God. Get into the battle formation. They are coming. Meng Xiang stared ahead and suddenly raised his arm above his head. Roar! Waves of sound came from the void. The 30,000 divine guards shuttled back and forth according to their individual realms and began to arrange themselves into a battle formation in an orderly manner. Nearly 30 Thearch-level divine generals lined up at the back of the divine martial hall. Behind them, more than 200 Tharch servants lined up in the middle. Behind the Tharch servants were the elite divine guards and low-level divine guards. However, even the lowest-ranking divine guards had comprehended a trace of the power of the human ruler. Apart from a small number of Yuan Venerate reserve candidates who had yet to be fully trained, the rest of the 30,000 divine guards in the nest were basically all human ruler powerhouses. Thus, the scale of this force was overwhelming. The void was very quiet at the moment. Everyone, including the Sunset War God, was waiting respectfully for the arrival of the army commanded by Dendi. Many of the divine guards and divine generals were clenching their fists nervously, as they knew that many people would die in this battle. However, the final victor would definitely be the Sunset War God. This was their belief. In the direction of the North Territory, a vast expanse of Emperor light slowly pressed down. Even from a distance, the suffocating feeling made it hard for people to breathe. Within the Emperor light that seemed to cover the sky, Dendi and Qin Hao's silver hair fluttered in the wind. Their hands were clasped behind their backs, and they looked very calm. Dendi wasn't the only one. Behind him, Sword Master True Polarity, Dao Ancestor Qilin, Zhuiying Sword Emperor, Phoenix Flower Supremacy Fenglan, and the other large powerhouses of the various factions also looked very calm. The various factions had been preparing for this battle for a long time. Perhaps many people had been nervous and uneasy before the battle. Even when they were standing on the 100-spirit Dao Peak, they couldn't help but feel apprehensive. They didn't know whether following Dendi was right or wrong. However, today, no one's state of mind would be shaken. They would face everything calmly. Even if they fell, they would face it with a smile. Under the general trend, the times would eventually change. If they didn't shatter under the cogs of the times, they would have to drive the cogs to shatter others. They were willing to be the pioneers of driving the cogs and create a new era. I never expected that the final person to be unblemished would actually be Empress Yue. Dao Ancestor said with a chuckle. Dao Ancestor Hai, Emperor Bai Li Xiuxing, and the other island lords and former island lords had all reached the perfected true self realm. In fact, the people who were most likely to reach this step first were Dao Ancestor Hai, Emperor Bai, and Li Xiuxing. Their chances were greater than Mu Yue's. However, the world was unpredictable. 600 years ago, Weiwei's cultivation was no weaker than Dao Ancestor Hai and Dao Ancestor Li. However, because of me, her cultivation regressed. After a long period of recuperation and nourishment, it's not surprising that she could reach the unblemished realm first. Qin Hao explained. In the past, he and Vivian had often discussed Dao at the Sunset Peak. They exchanged their martial Dao morals, and the two of them had even created a set of Emperor-grade sword art. Vivian was also familiar with some of the things that Qin Hao was good at. Bai Ling Peak had set up the formation orb, and Weiwei was a strong-willed person. She was more daring than others when it came to cultivation. Now that she had broken through the shackles, there was no luck involved. It was truly her hard work. In the group, Ancestor Treading Sea, Li Xiuxing, White Emperor, and the others were ashamed after hearing this. Perhaps it was because she was eager to save her father, but Mu Yue was indeed more hard-working than them in the formation realm. The Sunset Peak is in front. Juniors at the back, listen carefully. If there is no special need, do not stand out. Emperor Bai exhorted sternly. Yes, Dao Ancestor. Yes, Senior. At the back of the army, the descendants of the various factions responded. The War God Guards were the top martial arts prodigies selected by the Sunset Battle God from the 5 realms. It was said that the outstanding ones had talent that was no weaker than the descendants of the Overlord factions. Therefore, this battle was still very dangerous. Moreover, those god generals were all experts at the Imperial Master level and above. The Dao Might released in the chaotic battle was very terrifying. If anyone accidentally stood out and got caught in the crossfire, the chances of survival would be very low. Qin Hao looked behind him and saw Xiao Han and Bao Er together. He wanted to warn them but found that there was no need. This battle was very dangerous. Once it started, Qin Hao would not be able to protect Bao. However, the girl had a divine item protecting her and many Imperial Masters gathered around her. Before they set off, he had told Xiao Gua, Yi Shuihan, and the others to keep an eye on her. There should not be any accidents. It was a little difficult to be a father. Now, there are still 3 of the 12 villains that have not been found. I hope Zhan Wu can give me an answer. Today, he stepped onto the Sunset Peak to save Mu Xinzhao and Xing Er. Secondly, Qin Hao was to find out the truth of what happened back then. 600 years ago, after his emperor body was destroyed in the Valley of the Gods, why were Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian fine? Moreover, after the incident in Daqin, Zhan Lang and the other three were severely injured and expelled. Did all of this have nothing to do with what happened in the Valley of the Gods? Qin Hao did not think so. Even if Zhan Wu and Han Lingxian did not collude with the 12 villains, there should be some connection. Would the 12 villains let them leave safely 600 years ago? Yu Jing of Ludao Island, Shinshao Palace Lord, Wenqing Nunnery, Sword Elder Qingxuang, Ancestral Patriarch Han Tian, and Ancestral Patriarch Yun Tian were all killed. Feng Lan and Zhou Wendi wanted to change because Bao Er and Zhou Wudao were involved. Qin Hao would definitely give them a chance to resolve the hatred between them. Xianyuan Wutian had escaped and there was still no news of him. Then, 9 of the 12 villains had appeared. Who were the remaining 3? Qin Hao stared at the void. He could faintly see the sunset peak and the overwhelming light and murderous aura there. This time, he confronted Zhan Wu head-on. Saving Mu Xinzhao and Xing Er was the priority. Secondly, he wanted to ask for the whereabouts of the remaining 3 villains from Zhan Wu. It would be best if he did not shed any blood. However, looking at the formation of the Sunset Peak God of War guards, the Sunset God of War would not be so easy to talk to. The army of the North Territory advanced steadily. There were many overlord forces in the army, including the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect, the Taoist sect of the South Territory, the Celestial sect of the West Territory, the Juying Sword Palace of the Middle Territory, the White Moon Pavilion, and the Thunder Pool Palace. In addition, there were also the Shuo clan of the East Sea and the Water Jade Palace. Including Qin Hao, there were a total of 7 unblemished Great Emperors or Great Emperors who were comparable to unblemished Great Emperors. In terms of numbers, they had the upper hand. Even so, the pressure they faced was still great. There were 7 commanders under the God of War. Although the divine generals of True Self and great emperors of Tao were not as many as Qin Hao, they were not necessarily weaker than the overlords. In addition, there was a particularly troublesome hidden danger in the eastern border. After more than 600 years, we have finally waited for this moment. Welcome back to the Sunset Peak, brother. An incomparably huge Emperor's light came, pressing down on the opposite side of the Sunset Peak. It was like an army from outer space. Through the layers of brilliant light, one could see the vast and mighty experts inside. Zhan Wu's tall figure stood in the void. He smiled and stared at the person in front of the countless experts. His silver hair flowed elegantly, and his temperament was restrained and cold. Although his appearance was no longer the same as before, it could not change Denda's true form. Qin Hao had cultivated again. He had finally returned. Yes, after more than 600 years, almost 700 years, I have finally returned. Qin Hao said quietly. His voice carried an indescribable vicissitude. He stared forward, looking at Zhan Wu, whose body was covered in flowing light. The terrifying light seemed to be able to blind people. After all these years, the strong and dark-skinned young man who used to play with him had now become old. Chapter 19:15. Silver hair mixed with his sideburns, and fishtail-like wrinkles bloomed on both sides of his eyes. Accompanied by the sunset battle god's smile, the loose skin on his face gathered to form the word command on both sides of his nose, giving off a solemn feeling. He didn't have the high-spirited and arrogant spirit of a youth. Traces of the vicissitudes of life could be seen all over his body. Zhan Wu was old. Even the sunset battle god respected by the 5 realms couldn't withstand the wind and frost of the great Tao. Today you return to the Sunset Peak, and I am happy in my heart. However, as a brother, why did you lead the troops here? Zhan Wu interrogated. Qin Hao's gaze swept across the vast lineup of battle god guards. Naturally, he saw Ning Tianxing, who had escaped from Ning Wu, and the white-haired old man with a long beard. Xianyuan Wutian. Qin Hao's expression darkened. Had he been hiding in the Sunset Peak all this time? This was indeed the most suitable place for him to hide. You and I don't have to pretend to be ignorant. Today, many of the emperors and old friends of the Five Realms are here. The Vajra Institute in the south, the Seven-Star Herb Institute in the east, and the Jixia Academy in the east are also watching. Don't you owe me an explanation for what happened back then? Qin Hao asked rhetorically. The monks of the Vajra Institute, the Herb Institute, and the Jixia Academy all stood in the distance. They had no intention of stepping forward to enter the array. Obviously, they weren't the Sunset Battle God's helpers. What happened back then? Zhan Wu raised his eyebrows and silently repeated. Outside the buried God Temple, I was trapped in the Nine Heavens God's punishment array. My large body was destroyed, but you and Han Lingxian were unharmed. All these years, one of you ruled the Daqin territory alone, and the other built the Battle God Temple at the Sunset Peak. Empress Lingxian, the Sunset Battle God. Who in the Five Realms dares to disrespect you? You really are my good brothers. Qin Hao sneered. Zhan Wu was silent. If you say that you have your own difficulties, then I believe you. But Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, and the others are innocent. Why did you kill the four of them and implicate so many people? Also, Wei Wei's father, Mu Xinzhao, the weapon immortal of Donghai, and the tens of thousands of old and young of the Mu clan, how did they offend you? Shouldn't you have an explanation for all these? Qin Hao bellowed. Then, he pointed at Ning Tianxing and Xianyuan Wutian. Qin Hao's expression turned even colder. And these two people, you gathered them here. What's going on? Ning Tianxing and Xianyuan Wutian were Qin Hao's greatest enemies. If I hand them over to you to deal with, will you be able to calm Denda's anger and let the Tao Ancestor, Shadowless, and the others leave? Zhan Wu said. Sunset War God. Xianyuan Wutian suddenly looked at Zhan Wu, his eyes extremely sharp. What about Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, Uncle Mu, and Zhan Yi, who was detained here by you? Qin Hao shouted. Did they think that was the end? Zhan Lang, Yu Feng, and Xinyue wanted to kill me. Should I stretch my neck and let them kill me? As for Mu Xinzhao, I can let him go and bring them here because of our relationship. Zhan Wu ordered. Suddenly, with the sound of heavy iron chains being dragged, a miserable body with many penetrated bones was dragged out by several war god guards and floated beside the Sunset War God. In an instant, the Tao Ancestor, Emperor Bai, Juying Sword Emperor, Ancestral Patriarch Daohai, and many emperors of the East Continent were stunned and their hearts trembled. The top weapon immortal of the East Continent, Weapon Emperor Mu, who had been so popular that many emperors went to beg for the divine soldier, had been reduced to such a miserable state. He was crippled. Father! In the North Region Army, Mu Yue's heart clenched. Mu Xinzhao's hair was messy and his body was covered in blood. His aura was extremely weak, and his limbs and shoulder blades were pierced by thick iron chains. His emperor body was crippled. Traces of divine platinum dilly flowed along the iron chains and flowed to the Sunset Mountain, nourishing the mountain. Just like the rumors said, Zhan Wu had used Emperor Will to nourish the mountain. Qin Hao, Wei Wei, don't worry about me, and don't talk nonsense with Zhan Wu, this heartless beast. Just kill him. Mu Xinzhao was like a pile of mud, suspended in the void by 6 iron chains. The other end of each iron chain was held by a war god guard. Zhan Wu Yu. Mu Yue's heart ached as if she had been pierced by a sharp knife. Majestic Emperor Will rolled around her, and she wanted to kill the Sunset War God. Don't be rash. Uncle Mu is still in Zhan Wu's hands. Qin Hao grabbed Mu Yue's shoulder. After being tortured like this, Uncle Mu was like a cripple. He couldn't resist at all. The 6 war god guards holding the iron chains only needed to pull gently, and he would be torn apart. Young master. Qin Hao, you guys go. Don't worry about us. Xing Er and Yao Lao were also brought out by the war god guards. However, compared to Emperor Mu, the two were not injured. Perhaps their cultivation was too low, so Zhan Wu didn't bother to teach them a lesson. It was in line with his style. I can let them go. Ning Tianxing and Xianyuan Wutian can be handed over to you. As long as you let the people behind you go back to where they came from, we can even be brothers. In the East Continent we are on equal footing, Zhan Wu said. Qin Hao's heart was beating rapidly. He had witnessed the fate of Mu Yue's father, as well as Xing and Yao Lao being in Zhan Wu's hands. With a single thought, 3 lives could be wiped out in front of him. How could he not be nervous? However, he couldn't just let it go. At this moment, Zhan Guang he saw Xing and Yao Lao being brought out by the war god guards. However, he didn't see Zhan Yi. He couldn't help but shout, "Where is Zhan Yi? Where is my great-great-grandson?" Thump. Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and the others felt their hearts skip a beat. That's right. Where was Zhan Yi? Back then, he was taken away from God Burial Valley by Zhan Lu. Logically speaking, he should be detained here like Xing and Yao Lao. Why didn't he see Zhan Yi? You mean that brat with a rather sturdy body and a rather stubborn temper? He was too undisciplined and accidentally died. Zhan Wu said casually. Boom. Zhan Guanghe's mind seemed to explode as he froze on the spot. Zhan Ye's father, Zhan Wenjie, suddenly turned pale. He staggered and lost his footing. He felt the world spin and he nearly fainted. Was Zhan Yi dead? You! Zhan Guanghe roared as he released his 9 emperor rings at the same time. An extremely intense Emperor Dao radiance flowed around his body. When he raised his palm high, it was like a peerless saber. Saber intent that contained a torrential fury filled the air as it slashed towards Zhan Wu's head. Guanghe! Qin Hao roared loudly. His voice was like a heavenly voice that caused Zhan Guanghe's action to freeze midway. My son. Zhan Wenjie felt as though his heart had been dug out by someone. He couldn't help but cry. Their parting back then had become an eternal parting. He had failed to fulfill his responsibility as a father. He had let Zhan Yi down. He's not very obedient. Instead of leaving him to cause trouble, it's better to end it once and for all. I'm sorry. Zhan Wu twisted his fingers and stretched his muscles as he chuckled nonchalantly. Big brother. Zhan Yi can't die for nothing. Yi Shuihan and the others stepped forward at the same time and stuck close to Qin Hao's back. Their eyes were red as they stared at the sunset battle immortal. This person was too arrogant. Phew! Qin Hao let out a suppressed breath. Was Zhan Yi dead just like that? In the end, he was still implicated by Dendi. Release Uncle Mu, Xing and Yao Lao. Hand over Ning Tian and Xianyuan Wutian. Also, let the murderer of Zhan Yi pay with his life. If you do that, I can promise you that I will dismiss the Emperor Lords of the North region, including Fenghua. Of course, other than that, you need to tell me who the 12 people who participated in the Valley of the Gods were, and who was behind the scenes. Qin Hao gritted his teeth and said, Are you joking with me? Zhan Wu pretended to be surprised. That brat Zhan Yi died under my hands. According to what you said, I have to pay with my life. As for the 12 murderers, forgive me for not being able to tell you because I don't know. Then why are you still talking nonsense with me? Qin Hao suddenly clenched his fist. A thunderous boom exploded in the void. Brother, you have to consider carefully. You didn't want to return to the Sunset Peak. You didn't want to be the East Continent's Dendi and insisted on breaking ties with me. Is it worth it? Zhan Wu said softly. Qin Hao, I'll leave Weiwei to you. Zhan Wu die. Without waiting for Qin Hao to speak, Mu Xinzhao, whose body had been pierced by the 6 iron chains, suddenly released a monstrous emperor light from his mud-like body. It formed a mighty storm and stirred up the turbulent Dili. The 6 winding iron chains waved wildly and broke free from the hands of the war god guards. They pierced toward the sunset battle god like sharp thorns. Have a safe journey. The sunset battle god looked over with a cold expression. His voice echoed in the void. It was unclear whether he said this deliberately for Qin Hao and the others to hear, or for Mu Xinzhao himself. Zhan Wu's palm was aimed at Mu Xinzhao across the void. A layer of light emerged. He suddenly clenched his fist. The Emperor's will resonated with the life shackles. It was as if he had injected a surge of heavenly might. The chains rolled back one after another and pierced into Mu Xinzhao's body like vicious snakes. They twisted into a ball on the spot. "Ah Wu, thank you for your hard work," Mu Xinzhao murmured. Mu Xinzhao murmured. Even though his face was filled with hatred, his soul had been liberated at this moment. Boom! An astonishing loud sound burst out, and countless broken iron chains were shattered. The Penglai weapon immortal body was dead. Space was still at this moment. Countless people looked over in shock. Even the abbot of the Vajra Academy and the palace lords of Jisha Academy, who were watching the battle from afar, were shocked. Mu Xinzhao was dead. At this moment, Mu Yue also looked over in shock. As countless iron chains fell, her father disappeared before her eyes. In the next moment, a heart-wrenching scream erupted from the North Territory Army. It was like a huge wave surging violently. Layer by layer, it shook the first divine peak of the East Continent. Mu Yue broke free from Qin Hao's grasp. Like a streak of light, she pierced through space and charged toward Zhan Wu. "I'll deal with her." At this moment, one of the four figures standing behind Zhan Wu moved. He was known as one of the most mysterious four unblemished cultivators of the divine martial hall. Like a wind controller, his aura merged with the heavenly path. He was also extremely fast. Under the shocked expressions of countless people, this person used Denda's unique technique, the water-wind step. In an instant, he collided with Mu Yue, who had turned into a beam of light. Chapter 1916. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio Meeting. A strong enemy. Bang. Rumble. As if the heavens had collapsed, a beam of light erupted between the Sunset Peak and the North Territory Army. Everyone saw the light first, and then they heard a deafening roar. Even though the distance was so close, the transmission of sound was still faster than the transmission of light. The flawless Heavenly Emperor used human strength to channel the momentum of the Heavenly Tao into the Emperor technique, and the power of the explosion was terrifying. When the aftermath radiated out, whether it was the 30,000 war god guards or the various overlords of the North Territory, they all felt a shock in front of them. If it weren't for the powerhouses on both sides holding the fort in front, those with low cultivation would have been directly torn apart by the aftermath of this Tao will. Even peak-stage human emperors and even lower-level emperors couldn't escape. Suddenly, the disciples of Fenghua sect, White Yue Xian, Juying Sword Palace, Sword Sect, Thunder Pool Palace, and many other sects retreated in horror. Mu Yue let out a muffled groan. Her forward figure was blocked, and she slid back for a distance. Even though she had stepped into the flawless Emperor technique, she could feel that the other party's cultivation was superb. Wind. At this time, the powerhouse from the Divine Martial Hall who blocked Mu Yue reported his Emperor title. Qin Hao's eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at the wind. This person's movement technique was Water-Wind Divine Flash? In his previous life, he was sworn brothers with Zhan Wu, and Xiaolo's skills were taught by Dendi and the Sunset Battle God. Among the War God Guards, there was naturally no lack of other people who cultivated Denda's secret technique. But Qin Hao was still surprised. Putting aside their standpoints, this person's attainments in the Fleetfoot Steps were extraordinary, and he was no weaker than the Battle Tower. As expected of the strongest person from the Divine Martial Hall under the Sunset Battle God. This talent was rare in the four regions. Those who stop me die. Mu Yue spat out an extremely cold voice. A cold light bloomed in her palm, and a sword appeared, flowing with the dazzling brilliance of an emperor artifact. This sword was her father's proud masterpiece. Although it wasn't as old as the phoenix flower's sacred object, the dream branch, which had been passed down for a long time and had been nurtured by the Tao intent of several phoenix flower sovereigns, allowing it to stir up the momentum of a world, its material was definitely not inferior to any Supreme Emperor artifact. Holding her father's work in her hand, Mu Yue's body surged with Emperor's light. Traces of sacred radiance flowed, as countless dense sword shadows flew from her wrist, turning into a dense whistling light that swept towards the divine martial hall's wind warrior. Boom! Vibrations could be heard in the void as the wind cultivator's body technique shifted, appearing in different locations without a trace. He relied on his water wind steps to dodge the rain of swords. As he opened his palms, waves after waves of Emperor light pierced through the void towards Mu Yue. A seedling planted in a potted plant will sooner or later devour another seedling for the same sunlight. No matter how perfect a broken mirror is, it still can't close the crack. Hundreds of years of brotherhood have come to this stage today. You and I are ultimately standing on different sides. That's fine. Then let's kill. Zhan Wu's voice carried a hint of sadness. He and Qin Hao had been together for more than several hundred years. The primordial origin, the beginning of the primordial chaos, the divine world, the mortal realm, the outer realm, the divine wilderness, several reincarnations. Qin Hao really didn't care about him. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't sad, but he couldn't blame Dendi, who asked him to lose his memories and become an incomplete soul. Then, Zhan Wu raised his hand and waved it forward. Kill. Boom. On the sunset peak, 30,000 divine guards move. Kuei Han's wild eyes released a bloodthirsty bloodlust. With a boom, his body, which was covered in a sinister green armor, shot out from his original position. A terrifying fist radiance blasted towards the North Territory army. The sky was filled with violent lightning power. Seeing this, Showuk pressed down with his sword finger, wanting to release the power of the sword calamity. Kuei Han has been famous for a long time. He is crazy about martial arts and is the strongest and most terrifying person among the Sunset Peak's commanders. This person has a violent nature. Rumor has it that he even dares to disobey the orders of the Sunset Battle God. Logically speaking, the Emperor Lord of the East Continent, who is equally famous, should fight him. I will go. Zhuang's Sword Emperor pulled Wuk and stepped out first. As the monstrous lightning struck, he pointed his sword towards the sky and merged his Tao intent into the great Tao. A row of divine swords descended from the sky, forming a sword array, blocking in front of the army. However, this sword array was directly destroyed by Kuei Han's fist. Zhuang, you are no match for me. On the other side, Kuei Han roared savagely. He was like a tall madman. Every step he took caused the void to tremble. Such a martial maniac charged over without fear of death. It was a huge impact. Many of the juniors from the North Territory subconsciously retreated. Zhuang's Sword Emperor pointed out a finger, an extremely pure sword intent condensed. His finger was like a divine sword, erupting with surging sword radiance. After shattering Kuei Han's fist, he immediately broke away from the group, as if he wanted to lure Kuei Han away. Kuei Han's killing intent was too strong, and it was very troublesome to stay here. In order to prevent too many disciples from dying, the best way to deal with him was to lure him away from the Sunset Peak. Kuei Han naturally knew what Zhuang's Sword Emperor was planning, but he still chased him into the void. Immediately, the fierce sounds of the two fighting came from the horizon. Zhuang's Sword Emperor was quite famous in the East Continent, and he was known as the ancestor of swordsmanship. Kuei Han's killing of Zhuang would add to Wu Kuang's battle record. This came from his confidence in his strength. Wuk raised his eyes and stared at the void in the distance. He knew that fighting with Kuei Han was extremely risky, so Zhuang's Sword Emperor took the initiative to bear the risk. This was because he was afraid that Wuk would encounter an accident. But who could be safe after today's battle? Wuk took a step forward. A layer of golden sword shadows lingered around his body as he directly appeared in the middle of the army of war god guards. When the sword intent swept out, the bodies of countless war god guards exploded one after another. Even if they were ordinary Yuanfu emperors, they wouldn't be able to withstand the Tao intent of Wuk. At this moment, a ray of light suddenly slashed down. It was boundless and extremely domineering. Wuk felt a threat descending. He focused his finger and pointed upwards. 1,000 elephant divine sword broke through the sky. Clang! Flames raged in the sky. Wuk's body was shaken and sank a long distance. Divine Martial Hall, bladeless. A divine general in divine armor appeared above Sword Master Zhenji's head. Then, he slashed out with his empty palm again. The void was split into two, and an unparalleled Tao intent descended in front of Sword Master Zhenji. Wind, bladeless, Kongqing Yu, divine Martial Hall, 4 unblemished. At this moment, not only did Wind and Bladeless attack, but Kongqing and Yu also joined the battle. Feng Lan held the dream branch in her hand. Waves of spiritual qi of heaven and earth continuously surged from the north. This force filled the gap in her Tao intent, allowing the pseudo-unblemished Phoenix Flower Prime to have the strength of a true unblemished cultivator. Feng Lan's opponent was Yu, fighting an old man who's about to die. Even if I win, it's quite boring. In front of the Tao ancestor, a skinny divine general spoke in a mischievous tone. It was as if he wasn't in the middle of a battle. Then you have to be careful. If an old man who's about to die is unhappy, he might drag an unlucky guy down with him, Bo Changji said. Is that so? Kongqing's tone suddenly became sharp. Light flashed in his eyes. His Tao intent transformed into domain power and whistled out. Suddenly, rows of magnificent palaces appeared around the Tao ancestor like illusions. These luxurious palaces surrounded Bo Changji in the center. The will of the emperor rumbled unceasingly, causing a resonance. In an instant, a great force descended. Countless illusory palaces closed in at the center. Each of the palaces contained astonishing power of rules. Tao formation. Bo Changji was surprised. There was actually a unblemished formation emperor among the war god guards who was skilled in formations. Before coming, he'd talked with Qin Hao. Zhan Wu probably didn't have any cultivators who were skilled in formations. Otherwise, the North Army wouldn't have approached Sunset Peak so rashly. If Sunset Peak had set up a powerful formation and activated a formation to attack, the various forces would have suffered heavy casualties. But the Tao ancestor had miscalculated. Bo Changji smiled faintly. He flicked the dust of Taoist in his hand. Rays of Emperor's light flew out and poured into the magnificent palaces. Suddenly, the speed at which these palaces were condensing began to slow down. The light they emitted also changed. It was as if another will was forcing them to change the direction of their attack. Creation of Yin and Yang, reversing the universe. The Tao ancestor had once swept through the south for an era. It wasn't an undeserved reputation. Roars of battle filled this part of the world. The unblemished cultivators of the North Territory fought with cultivators of the same level as those of Sunset Peak. The cultivators of the First Realm of True Self and the First Realm of Proving Way also broke out in a fierce battle. The great elder of the Sea Stomper released his will. Countless reefs appeared in the void. The reefs were incomparably huge and turned into mountains to suppress the world. They pressed down on a certain divine general of Sunset Peak until he couldn't move. This divine general was Gu Che, whom Qin Hao had met in the Valley of the Burial God. Back then, Zhu Mian of Daqin had lost an arm to Qin Hao. Gu Che served the Sunset Battle God, so he didn't dare to act rashly. At that time, because he had received the inheritance of a divine palace guard statue, Gu Che's cultivation had advanced rapidly in recent years. He followed closely behind Meng Xiang and broke through the First Realm of Proving Way to become the first emperor of True Self. Unfortunately, Today he was facing an experienced first realm of true self-patriarch. The three immortals of the East Sea, Artifact Immortal Mu Xinjiao, Great Elder Han Tian, and the Great Elder of the Sea Stomper. These three giants lived up to their names. The Great Elder of the Sea Stomper had completed the first realm of true self, and was very close to the unblemished realm. Whether in terms of foundation or strength of will, he was above Gu Che. Even though Gu Che had an extraordinary divine power, he was now being beaten by the Great Elder of the Sea Stomper. Emperor Bai and the second Lord of Phoenix Flower Island, the Azure Emperor, went to the Great Elder of the Divine Sword Wind people. The Great Elder of the Wind wasn't weak, but compared to Emperor Bai, he was already weaker. Now with the Lord of Azure Island, the battle was dangerous. He kept calling for help from the other divine generals of the Sunset Peak. Unfortunately, at this time, no one cared about the divine sword wind people. The divine generals of the Sunset Peak couldn't even take care of themselves. Yunro was facing Meng Xiang. After dozens of years, Meng Xiang's Emperor Dao cultivation had become even more shocking. His divine elephant power crushed the void and turned into a vast herd of elephants. Yunro's qi and blood were in turmoil. Back then, Yunro's realm was inferior to Meng Xiang's. Even though they were at the same level now, the difference in will couldn't be made up. Dai, the Great Elder of the Celestial Cliffs, who had joined the Sunset Battle God, was called Great Elder Wu. He threw out a seal of mountains and seas, which made many emperors of the north spit out blood. Coincidentally, the seal pressed directly into the square where the celestial sects were gathered. In an instant, the pressure on sect leader Hu, sect leader Su, and sect leader Quan increased greatly. The three emperors of true self had a hard time resisting the seal's suppression. The seal of mountains and seas wasn't an ordinary magic treasure. Like the dream branch, it was passed down from generation to generation in the celestial cliffs. Even though it wasn't as strong as the divine soldier of the Phoenix Flower first-generation ancestor, it wasn't something that ordinary people could resist. With the seal of mountains and seas in his hand, Great Elder Wuya's Emperor Will of True Self was greatly strengthened. Hu Qianxiu and Su Qing saw the formation light that the three elders of the celestial sects painstakingly supported gradually crack. It was showing signs of being crushed. They couldn't help but turn pale and tremble. If this was suppressed, except for the three sect leaders, the rest of the celestial sects would be wiped out. You ignorant Wuya, how dare you hurt my descendant? I'll take your life. At this moment, a hoarse and angry roar came from the sky. Then, a formation flag flew over and hung in the air above the celestial sect's square formation. Boom! The array flag blossomed with surging Dao light and directly sent the seal of mountains and seas flying. Many people turned their heads to look and saw a strange old man whose face was flushed red, as if his wife had been stolen in the middle of the night. He held a walking stick in his hand and smashed it towards Patriarch Wuya's face. That kind of crazy and fierce attack blasted Patriarch Wuya back repeatedly. If it were not for the strange old man's legs not being very nimble, perhaps Patriarch Wuya would have already been injured by his crazy walking stick. Great Elder, sect leader who was pleasantly surprised. The Tao will of the magic treasure suppressing the sky disappeared, and he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Cripple Hu of the celestial sects finally came. Reading House. Chapter 1917. Even within the same realm, there were differences in strength. Even though the three sect masters of the celestial sect were at the same level as Patriarch Wuya, there was still a gap in their combat strength. They were worried about the safety of their juniors, so they were forced to defend. Naturally, they were not as relaxed as Patriarch Wuya, who was attacking without restraint. Moreover, Patriarch Wuya was activating the seal of mountains and seas to release its power. However, as Cripple Hu rushed into the formation, the celestial sect's disadvantage immediately turned into an advantage. Cripple Hu and Patriarch Wiao were experts of the same generation, but because one of his legs was crippled by Qin Hao, he could not cultivate many emperor technique. However, according to his family's cultivation method and his own situation, he created a crazy walking stick technique, which was extremely powerful when used. At this moment, Patriarch Wiao was restrained by Cripple Hu. Sect Master Hu, Sect Master Su, and Sect Master Quan immediately freed themselves and joined the battle. Sect Master Hu and Sect Master Su joined forces with Sect Master Hu to kill Patriarch Wiao, while Sect Master Quan looked after the Celestial Sect's formation. Patriarch Wiao was attacked by 3 Emperor Lords of the same realm, and the situation took a turn for the worse. If not for the seal of mountains and seas, he would have died under the power of the 3 true Self-Tao Masters. As far as the eye could see, chaotic battles between Monarch Realm experts were taking place everywhere in the vast void. Once someone attacked from the War Immortal Guard army, the North Territory would send experts of the same level to intercept them. At that moment, Xianyuan Wutian and Crown Prince Ning Wu of the southern region were among the many cultivators who were charging towards the north region. The protective Emperor's light that they emitted was the most eye-catching. Even in the midst of countless Emperor Realm cultivators, their Emperor's light stood out. Go back. Saint Emperor Jiang saw this and sent a palm print containing the poison Tao precepts toward Xianyuan Wutian. Xianyuan Wutian's messy hair was tangled with the long beard on his face. His eyes were red, and he roared like a sick madman. Waves of Emperor's light of gravity rose around him. Countless layers of Emperor's light overlapped and turned into an extremely powerful defensive power. Saint Emperor Jiang's palm print directly shattered on it, but it did not stop him. Roar! At this moment, an extremely large lava giant stepped out from the North Territory's army and rushed towards the Xianyuan imperial family's ancestor. It raised its mountain-sized fist and directly punched out, throwing out a wave of scorching lava. Boom! Countless flaming stars danced along with the light of the fist. This punch firmly blocked Xianyuan Wutian's steps and even forced him to take a few steps back. Brat from the Blazing Sun Temple. Xianyuan Wutian stared crazily at the lava giant that was blocking his way. He could vaguely see a figure standing inside the huge flaming body. As a southern region cultivator, he naturally recognized the other party's emperor technique and aura. He was none other than the head of the southern region's holy temple, Sun God. However, Sun Spirit, who had been a little brat in front of great ancestor Xianyuan back then, had now grown into an existence that could contend with him. Indeed, the younger generation would surpass the older. There was no need for more words. Xianyuan Wutian immediately engaged in a fierce battle with the lava fire spirit controlled by the Sun God. Waves of ferocious Emperor will bombarded the area where the two of them were. It was as if the end of the world had come. The battle was extremely intense. Other than Holy Emperor Jiang, no one dared to approach this area. At this moment, Crown Prince Ning Tianxing glanced over. At first, the Sunset Battle God said that he and Xianyuan Wutian would hand him and Xianyuan Wutian over to Qin Hao to calm Denda's anger. At that time, he and Xianyuan Wutian were extremely nervous. But now, the relationship between Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle God had completely broken down, and there was no possibility of peace talks. Then, it was time to go all out. Ning Tianxing did not pay attention to great ancestor Xianyuan. Even if he saw Saint Emperor Jiang glaring at him from the side, and who knew when he would make a move, he had no intention of stepping forward to help. There was no relationship between him and Xianyuan Wutian. What did Xianyuan Wutian's life have to do with him? Ning Tianxing's Guqin spirit bloomed, and black and white chess pieces emerged, turning into a halo of light that surrounded his body. His will of the way radiated, spreading toward the army of the northern land. His body gradually exuded a mysterious and strange power. It was hard to say how powerful this power was, but it gave off an extremely dangerous feeling. Others are fighting with their lives here. Don't ruin things and play your guqin. Just as Ning Tianxing was about to urge the laws of heaven and earth to play the demonic chaotic divine melody to interfere with the battlefield, a tall figure suddenly appeared in front of him. This figure was shrouded in demonic qi, like a thick cloud of black smoke. There was a pair of small horns on its forehead, and it was looking down at him with a pair of cold eyes. It gave people the feeling that this person was looking at an ant. He regarded Crown Prince Ning Tianxing, who had the power of the divine path, as an ant from the lower world. Zhou Wudao. Ning Tianxing saw the other person's facial features clearly and was very surprised. Under the thick demonic qi, Zhou Wudao's temperament changed greatly. His figure was also taller and more imposing than before, and even his appearance changed slightly. However, this outline could still be recognized. It was Zhou Wudao, the prince of the great Zhou Empire, who was slaughtered by the Xiang. Zhou Wudao, did he not die? Moreover, the aura on his body was the power of the divine path. No, it was not the divine path, but the pressure was not inferior to the laws. This was the demonic way. Haha, back then, you were known as the second most talented person in the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, second only to Qin Hao. Even Shouwuk was not in your eyes. I have always wanted to experience it, and today I have such a rare opportunity. Come on, Ning Tianxing, let me see what you are capable of. Although you have always been second, before I beat Qin Hao, I am still quite interested in getting rid of you first. After Zhou Wudao finished speaking, he turned into a gust of demonic qi and fled into the void. His soul had fused with the will of the 10 underworlds demon king. He was Zhou Wudao and also the reincarnation of the 10 underworlds great demon. If the power of the demonic god exploded here, except for the unblemished cultivators of both sides, no one could survive. Ning Tianxing looked up at the departing demonic qi and found it difficult to calm down. He hesitated for a moment, then decisively put away the guqin spirit and turned into a ray of brilliant divine light. Surrounded by the black and white chess pieces, he chased after Zhou Wudao. The sunset battle god was a legendary person. No, it should be said that he was a god, a true god. Having personally experienced Zhan Wu's ability, Ning Tianxing knew very well that in front of the sunset battle god, even if he could one day completely control the heaven and earth chess and be able to lead the weapon spirit, he would still be nothing more than a divine servant. This was like the difference between an emperor and an emperor. The difference between the two was like the difference between the clouds and the mud. He had no chance of becoming a god that dominated this world, because this divine wilderness continent already had a god, a divine king of war who had lived for countless years. Ning Tianxing chased after Zhou Wudao. Both of them had the power of laws that could destroy heaven and earth. Even if they hadn't fully mastered it, they were still the absolute destroyers under the heavenly Tao on the battlefield of Sunset Peak. Whether it was Qin Hao or Zhan Wu, they definitely wouldn't allow them to release their divine Tao laws unscrupulously. Boom, boom, boom. Countless emperor lights intertwined and shuttled back and forth. In the battlefield of the void of Sunset Peak, figures would often be hit by the emperor lights, causing their bodies to explode and their divine souls to disappear. Whether it was the battle god guards or the orthodoxies of the North Territory, even Emperor Yuan's chances of survival were very slim. Once they were hit by any of the laws, unless their cultivation was high enough and they could forcefully suppress it, they would immediately bleed on the spot. In a chaotic battle, who would have the chance to suppress their injuries? The divine martial hall's 4 unparalleled deities, Kuei Han, the sacred sword wind people's patriarch, Patriarch Wia, and dozens of Sunset Peak's true self-divine generals, including Meng Xiang, were all restrained by the orthodoxies of the North Territory. On the contrary, no one dared to disturb Qin Hao and the Sunset Battle God, who were in the core area of the battlefield. Qin Hao and Zhan Wu looked at each other across space. Within 1,000 meters of the two of them, an absolute domain was formed and no attacks came. At this time, Qin Hao's emperor intent radiated out, enveloping the vast void. Almost every situation of the powerhouses fighting could be clearly imprinted in his divine consciousness. The four people of the divine martial hall were indeed powerful. Wuk, Dao Zhu, Feng Lan, and Wei Wei didn't have the slightest advantage. Among them, Feng Lan and Wei Wei were even at a disadvantage. Moreover, the emperor techniques used by the four of them vaguely gave Qin Hao a sense of familiarity. Battle techniques, emperor techniques, and array Dao. It seemed that their areas of expertise had a hint of Dende back then. However, Qin Hao didn't have the time to pay attention to the four people of the divine martial hall. The pressure he faced was heavier than Wuk and the others. It could be said that in this battle, there was no clear winner between him and Zhan Wu. Neither side could be considered the final victor. Makamanji, Yunro, Bao'er, Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and Chen Wanqin. There were also Sherdong, Lian Han, Xikong Shu, and Zhong Liqing. There were also Shuo Xiu, Su Jin, and the others who were fighting. Many of them ran into divine generals of the Sunset Peak, who had proven their Dao. It's time, Qin Hao said quietly, looking at Zhan Wu. With every moment that passed, many people from both sides would die. Even if they weren't his people, the people of the White Lunar Pavilion, Thunder Pool Hall, 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower Sect, Shua Clan of the East Sea, Dao Sect, and Immortal Sect were also fated. They chose to trust Dende, hoping to survive in the chaos of the divine wilderness. Qin Hao couldn't let down everyone's trust. Between you and me, do we really have to go to this step? Zhan Wu's immense emperor will pervaded the air. His body flickered with the dazzling light of battle particles. Like Qin Hao, he was also observing the battlefield. He wasn't worried about the four people of the divine martial hall. He didn't care whether the sacred sword wind people and celestial cliffs were dead or alive. Other than suppressing the two unstable factors, Ning Tianxing and Kuei-Han, his emperor will was more focused on Bao'er and Xiaogua's group. Those people were considered the weaker ones in the Imperial Lord battle. It was easy for accidents to happen. He wouldn't be able to explain to anyone who died. This was a real battle. In his plan, other than Xiao Lu, Zhuge Xiu, and the four people of the Divine Martial Hall, no one else knew his intentions. Mu Xinzhao had already paid the price with his life in order to ignite the flames of war and force the Army of the North Territory to act. As for the rest of the War God Guards, they had also won for the War God with their faith. They were absolutely merciless. Big brother, this is the last time I'm calling you. You and I both know that I'm not fighting this battle for myself. Every second that passes will cost the lives of both your divine guards and mine. Qin Hao said. Do you have to get to the bottom of this? Do you have to chase me to the end? Zhan Wu said. Perhaps Dende would be sadder if he knew the truth. Let's do it. Qin Hao stretched out his hand. The blood-red red lotus Dao flame rose in his palm. He sighed. I don't know where you've arranged Xiao Lu and Zhuge Xiu. There's no aura of them here. But I can tell you that in this battle, other than a few servants, none of the orthodoxies will spare anyone. If you want to sneak in and cut off my path of retreat, I'm afraid you'll be disappointed. Zhan Wu was stunned. Was he really so unbearable in Qin Hao's eyes? Cut off his path of retreat? Yes, Zhan Wu had indeed cut off a path of retreat. It was his own path, the path of the 30,000 divine guards. He was willing to use the path of the war god in exchange for Dende's return to the primeval realm. He was willing to use his life to pave the way to the untainted land so that Qin Hao would not be trapped in this small world forever. Regardless of life or death, victory or defeat, you're still my brother. Zhan Wu smiled. Under the operation of the art of honest combat, His body emitted extremely strong battle-intent particles. He slowly clenched his fists that were wearing boxing gloves. At this moment, his temperament became incomparably cold, as if he had transformed into a real war god of the ninth heaven. Chapter 1918. Zhan Wu's body was filled with the light of fighting spirit particles. His aura began to rise as he used his cultivation technique. The sunset battle god, who was already shining brightly, now burst with the light of fighting spirit. No one below the unblemished Tharch realm could see through that layer of light and see the true appearance of the battle god. That light contained a very mysterious power of the great path. Even her 10,000 spirit fire eyes couldn't see through it. The two lords of the East Continent are finally going to fight. From afar, many East Continent grand cultivators who were carefully avoiding the battlefield saw the sunset battle god's aura become stronger and stronger. The pressure was so strong that it almost suffocated them. Not only the Lori battle god, but the Alchemy Emperor's aura was also growing stronger. Qin Hao's great Tao flames were like a layer of blood-red flames that burned the heavens. Everyone only had to feel the fire for a moment to feel the danger of being burned to death. The 3 deans of the 7-star pharmacy, the 4 palace lords of Jixia Academy, and many Buddhist monks of the Vajra Institute all stared at the 2 powerful cultivators. In this battle, who would become the true master of the divine wilderness, these 2 good brothers of the past would become the true master. Dean Feng, Taiya Shirtian Buddha Emperor, I advise all of you to behave yourselves in the contest between me and the Pill Emperor. Otherwise, I guarantee that all of you will die before me before I run out of strength. Zhan Wu stepped in the air and gradually approached Qin Hao. His godlike eyes stared in their direction. That gaze seemed to directly pierce through the divine souls and imperial bodies of the grand cultivators. Old man Taiya, the dean of the 7-star pharmacy, and Shirtian Buddha of the Vajra Institute all trembled at the same time. They were intimidated by the sunset battle god, and their bodies didn't seem to listen to them. Then, they led their masters and distanced themselves from the battlefield again. Of course, they didn't doubt the sunset battle god's warning. Even if they were still alive, Zhan Wu only needed to move a finger to kill them. At the end of the Emperor's path, who would be the peak? Under the sunset arrow, no emperor would exist. Boom! In order to intimidate the mighty figures who were watching the battle, Zhan Wu stomped his foot and dashed forward. His palm glowed with dazzling particles of fighting will as he slapped toward Qin Hao. The great path did not have any trace of the Emperor's light when he struck out his palm. However, everything seemed to be crushed and exploded under his palm, swallowed and dissolved by the light of the particles. Qin Hao unleashed the art of the indestructible samsara from within his body. The power of tyrannical fire wrapped around his body, rolling and roaring in his palm. Will of the great path filled the space, dominating the great path of this area. He also struck out with his palm. His palm collided with Zhan Wu's. Boom! The blood-colored waves of fire rolled and spread, sweeping wildly in all directions, mixed with terrifying particles of fighting will. With the 2 of them as the center, it swallowed up a radius of thousands of miles, shielding everyone outside and forming an absolute realm of the way. The fluctuation of this layer of Tao insight barrier was extremely strong, and it swallowed Dendi and the sunset war god within it and sealed them within. Everyone outside the barrier was unable to know the situation of the battle within. Their will of the way is too strong, and they are deliberately avoiding hurting their own people. In the army of the North Territory, Xiaogua, Yi Shuihan, and Chen Wanqin, with Bao as the center, protected her in the crowd. They all looked at the light of the realm of the way that had suddenly appeared. They didn't know how strong Qin Hao was at the moment, but they assumed that he had returned to the peak state of his previous life, or even surpassed it. After all, in these years of seclusion, Qin Hao had integrated the imperial techniques of his previous life and the unique techniques of the divine palace that he had cultivated after his rebirth. He couldn't be measured by the strength of an ordinary, unblemished great emperor. Moreover, Xiaogua and the others also knew that Qin Hao still had an ancient divine cauldron in his hand. If there were no divine-level experts, Dendu was basically invincible in the world. There was basically no suspense. Unfortunately, the Sunset War God was a god in the eyes of the people. As for how powerful Zhan Wu was, one would know by looking at the reverence that the supreme imperial lords of the five realms had for him. Therefore, in this battle, Qin Hao was still taking a huge risk. Zhan Wu had a divine bow in his hands, and it was said that its power was even more terrifying than Mingxi's. Don't worry. If he dares to fight this battle, it means that he is confident of winning. Xiao Han saw that Bauer was staring at the realm of the Wei with a serious expression. She must be worried about Qin Hao. I'm not worried about him. It's just that it feels so strange. Bao Er's beautiful eyes flickered with a faint fire. Ever since she had arrived at Sunset Peak, she had been unable to see through the Sunset War God's protective imperial light. She was naturally curious about what this expert, who was known as the top martial artist in the Divine Wilderness, looked like. But even after opening the Fire Spirit Eye, she still couldn't see through it. She could only vaguely feel that the Sunset War God was a little familiar. It was very strange. Swoosh! A beam of dazzling blade light slashed through the void. The terrifying blade light streaked across, and the robe of the white Yuexian Pavilion Master was instantly torn to shreds. His body spun rapidly under the blade light, and a piece of flesh was almost cut off. However, the two white Yuexian Pavilion Imperial Elders who were fighting nearby were not so lucky. Caught off guard, they were cut by the blade light. Their imperial bodies were split into two on the spot, and their spiritual souls were severed. A look of horror flashed across the white Yuexian Pavilion Master's eyes. He felt a pressure from his opponent and knew that if they continued to fight, they would most likely be defeated. Wan Qin, you stay here. Little Gua, go and help. Yi Shuihan saw the tragic state of the white Yuexian Pavilion Master's Emperor Dao cultivators and realized that the divine general of Sunset Peak, who was fighting white Yuexian Pavilion Master, was very strong. This was the natural intuition of a disciple of the divine palace. The strength of a person's Emperor Dao could be easily determined from the depth of the will released. White Yuexian Pavilion Master was obviously a little weaker than the divine general. Even though they were both emperors who had proven their Dao, they still couldn't defeat the other party. If they continued to fight, white Yuexian Pavilion Master would be in danger. Buzz buzz. Xiaogua and Yi Shuihan's bodies separated from the North Territory Army and joined the battle at the front. They had been painstakingly trained in the 100 Spirits formation realm and had also advanced from proving their Dao to becoming emperors. They were just at the same level as the divine general. Little Gua Shuihan, be careful. That person is not easy to deal with. Xiao Han hurriedly reminded them. Her cultivation level was one level higher, and she had stepped into the true self Emperor Dao. She could feel that the divine general who had defeated white Yuexian Pavilion Master's will was extraordinary. It seemed that he had gone through extremely hard training. Senior White, go support the others. Leave this to us. Yi Shuihan shouted loudly. As he spoke, a water spear condensed and flew through the air toward the divine general of Sunset Peak. Be careful. This person's will is extremely strong. White Yuexian Pavilion Master subconsciously looked below his ribs. His expression was very ugly. Half of his sleeve had been torn, and the sword will had even cut open his robe, leaving a shallow mark on his body. Fortunately, he had dodged quickly. Although his self-esteem had been hurt, white Yuexian Pavilion Master still chose to avoid the divine general after he finished speaking. He left him to Yi Shuihan and Xiaogua, and turned into a beam of emperor light to kill the other war god guards. Bang! At this moment, Yishuahan's water spear had just landed in front of the invincible blade. The invincible blade raised his eyes to take a look, and a smile appeared under his helmet. He swung the huge heavy blade in his hand and swept it up. With a buzzing sound, a heavy roar was heard in the void, and the water spear was shaken into water foam that filled the sky with ease. Weak and powerless, the invincible blade sneered with a mocking tone. Go! A hint of anger appeared on Yishuahan's face. He raised his palms high above his head, and a sacred blue light sprinkled down. His body was incomparably sacred in the light, like a heavenly water god who ruled the rivers. Behind him, the momentum of a vast ocean appeared. Under the drive of Tao Will, an endless stream of water rolled out. The huge waves rolled and roared, wanting to annihilate the opponent in the torrent. Roar! At the same time, Xiaogua released his emperor's spirit. A huge phantom of a green ox appeared behind him. The battle emperor art of Mizar Peak in his body was activated. His fists were pierced by the glaring golden light. They smashed into the sky, and two whitish gold fist forces shuttled through Yishuahan's huge waves. In front of me, even waves can be split open. The invincible blade's smile was even wider. When he spoke, the sarcasm in his voice was even stronger. He swung his huge heavy blade and slashed down with both hands. A beam of terrifying blade radiance slashed forward like a huge fin that split the river. With a boom, it collided with Xiaogua's fist radiance. Boom! A deafening roar broke out between heaven and earth. The fist radiance was destroyed by the blade radiance. The endless torrent that came crashing down burst along with it. Its momentum was not enough, and it even swept out in the opposite direction. It spread through the bodies of Yishuahan and Xiaogua, forcing the two of them to retreat in embarrassment. I'll let you see what power is. The invincible blade spat out a domineering voice. His burly body, wearing heavy armor, jumped up. The giant blade in his hand quickly waved twice, sweeping out two sharp rays of light. Chi! The rays of light cut through the space and intertwined into a cross-shaped slash. It carried a fierce blade will. It was as if countless blades were born in the void. They flew together with the cross-shaped slash and enveloped Yishuahan and Xiaogua at the same time. So strong! Yishuahan stabilized his body, and a look of shock appeared in his eyes. Other than the disciples of the Divine Palace, he had never seen anyone with such a strong will of the way. Not to mention the outside world, even among the disciples of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, there were not many masters who could achieve such destructive power. In Yishuahan's impression, only the personal disciples of the 7 peak masters had such a strong will of the way. Among these people, there were even fewer people who could defeat him and Xiaogua. Only Lei Jiao, Zhou Wudao, and Shou Wuk could. Of course, if Zhang Yi was alive and stepped into the Imperial Lord realm, he should also have such strength. It seemed that there were still some top geniuses on Sunset Peak who were not inferior to the disciples of the Divine Palace. Brother Han, this guy's sword will is a bit too strong. He's using his unique skill. Xiaogua gritted his teeth and said. At this time, he did not dare to underestimate his opponent in the slightest. No wonder Master Bai Xian could not resist. With such strength, he and Yishuahan also felt the pressure. If they did not use their unique skills, the two of them might die in the hands of their opponent. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Golden light constantly erupted from Xiaogua's back, waist, elbows, and knees. The 9 palaces of the War Emperor art were all opened, and he decisively cast the fighting battle law body. In an instant, a huge and majestic phantom of the war god descended from the sky above him. Its power suppressed the world and enveloped Xiaogua. As the barbaric roar of the ox spread out, Xiaogua's sovereign spirit and emperor will merged, and his entire body turned into a human-shaped ox. His eyes were red and his body stood upright. His body was covered in ferocious iron armor transformed from the ox demon Will. In his hand was a huge pitch-black ancient stone as big as a mountain. The stone was permeating an extremely powerful emperor weapon. Chapter 1919. Opening the 9 palaces, casting the fighting battle body, and releasing the demonic bull transformation Tao Will to the extreme, Xiaogua held the Emperor Artifact Ancient Stone in his hand. Layers of black light waves swept from his position as he displayed his peak martial strength. Yi Xuehan slowly closed her eyes. As her long hair fluttered in the wind, her body flashed with the radiance of an emperor's weapon. An azure armor covered her water god body. The will of the Wei in her blood rumbled. She was also using the supreme technique of Daozong Peak, the Empress Hua Holy Spirit Mantra. At this moment, Xiaogua and Yi Xuehan's aura reached the peak of their lives. They emitted a sense of oppression that forced the people nearby to retreat. Go! Yi Xuehan suddenly opened his eyes. His hand seals changed, and endless water vapor filled the space. Under the influence of his Tao will, the space seemed to be still. The battlefield seemed to have sunk to the bottom of the sea. Under the cover of his Tao will, everyone's movements and attacks became slow. The cross-slash that was coming from the front seemed to have been blocked by a deep-sea vortex. It suddenly stopped, and the sharp light dimmed a little. The countless blades that were shuttling along with it were also trapped in space, unable to leap forward. Roar! Xiaogua moved. Taking advantage of this opportunity, he hugged the huge ancient stone and rolled forward. Along the way, he crushed the void. The Emperor Will and the Emperor Artifact resonated. Accompanied by a violent shock wave, he crashed directly in front of the invincible blade. The invincible blade let out a low roar as he stared straight ahead. As the direct disciple of Mizar War Sovereign, he understood the power of the Battle Emperor art better than Xiaogua. Normal attacks could not break through the defense of the fighting battle body. Not only was his defense shocking, but his destructive power was even more shocking. A simple punch could injure an emperor. Moreover, Xiaogua had absorbed his soul into his body and was driving an ancient stone to crash toward him. Buzz! Beams of golden light constantly bloomed from all parts of the invincible blade's body. His 9 palaces' acupoints opened at the same time. Dilly surged in his meridians and gathered, flowing toward the domineering blade in his hand. His blade exploded with a blade radiance that was thousands of feet long. It slashed forward and hit the rolling ancient stone. Boom! Gu Shi was being held by Qi Xiaogua. His angle was very precise, and he had calculated everything while rolling. When the attack came, the blade just happened to be under the protection of Gu Shi, and it did not hurt Qi Xiaogua. However, the blade will of this strike was so strong that it managed to separate Qi Xiaogua from the ancient rock. A pale white mark appeared on the ancient rock, and the impact caused it to deviate from its original trajectory. It flew to the side, and as it rolled, a large number of Renhuang-level divine war guards were killed. It also crushed several people from the orthodoxies of the North Territory. God Fist. Gu Shi was sent flying, but Qi Xiaogua rushed to the front of the invincible blade. Her huge fist exploded with a dazzling golden emperor's ray, and she landed a heavy blow on the invincible blade's chest. Crack! The sound of bones cracking could be heard. The invincible blade had just cut off the ancient stone, but it also suffered from the emperor's weapon's will of Wei. His hands were numb, and before he could defend himself, he was hit by Qi Xiaogua's punch. Blood flowed out from under Zhang Ye's helmet. The power of the 9 palaces was terrifying. He felt as if his chest was penetrated by Xiaogua's fist will. He was severely injured. However, his mind was extremely clear. He knew what his mission was. At this moment, Zhang Yi endured the injury to his emperor body and punched Qi Xiaogua in the face. The latter's mouth was crooked, and he was sent flying like a cannonball. His cheeks were caved in from the impact. How is this possible? Yi Shuihan watched the battle with a shocked expression on his face. Battle Emperor Art. The divine general under the command of the Sunset War God was able to use the supreme imperial method of the Mizar Peak of the Divine Palace. It was impossible to describe Yi Shuihan's feelings at the moment. His mind was blank as he stared at Zhang Yi, who was also flying backward. He didn't need to think to know that this person was from the Divine Palace. Die. After Zhang Yi put some distance between them, he immediately found the space to use his blade technique. The Clan Slayer blade technique flew. Fierce rays of blade chi once again blasted toward Xiaogua and Yi Shuihan. The rays of light crisscrossed, carrying an unstoppable momentum. It was as if the heavens were about to collapse. Danger! Xiaohan's heart was beating fast. She did not expect that Xiaogua and Yi Shuihan would be suppressed in such a short exchange. She also did not expect this person to use the ultimate technique of the Divine Palace. There was no time to think. If this crisscrossing wave of power struck Xiaogua and the dazed Yi Shuihan, even if they did not die, they would be severely injured. Buzz. Buzz. In the void, figures moved one after another. The chief disciples of the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect, Xikong Shu, Lian Han, and Zhong Liqing, all left the formation of the North Territory and rushed forward. Almost as soon as Xiao Han pulled Xiaogua out of the jaws of death, the 3 imperial lords released their Dao power at the same time. Waves of Dili converged and formed a huge barrier to block the wave of blade light that cut through the void. Boom! The crisscrossing rays of light were like a net that shattered the barrier of Xikong Shu and the others. However, the ferocious momentum still caused the 3 of them to retreat 3 steps at the same time. Their faces were filled with shock. They were all imperial lords, but the divine general of the Sunset Peak was definitely stronger than them. What are you doing? Xiao Han dragged the confused Xiaogua and shouted at Yi Shuihan. No, it can't be him. Yes, it can't be. Why is it like this? Tears flowed out of Yi Shuihan's eyes as his expression became more and more painful. Seeing the other party use the Battle Emperor art and combining it with the domineering blade intent, he vaguely thought of a person. Zhang Yi. However, the Sunset Battle God had clearly said that Zhang Yi was already dead. At this moment, Yi Shuihan's mind was greatly affected and his thoughts were in chaos. If Zhang Yi wasn't dead, why did he join the Battle God Guards and become a divine general and become their enemy? What happened in between? Kill him. Xikong Shu's eyes were sharp. She didn't have the same feelings as Yi Shuihan. This divine general was the strongest of all the imperial lords in the Battle God Guards. He was even stronger than many imperial lords in the North Territory. He was a huge threat and had to be eliminated immediately. Screech! A huge phantom of a divine phoenix appeared and enveloped Xikong Shu's body. The first peak's ultimate technique, the Heavenly Phoenix Sword, was used. The power of Dao intent triggered a natural phenomenon. The 9 heavens' divine phoenix flew around Xikong Shu. She held the first peak's supreme imperial sword in her hand, and the sword intent she emitted grew stronger and stronger. 1. At the same time, Zhong Liqing released his imperial spirit. A primordial gourd appeared on his shoulder. Through it, one could faintly see a layer of shocking primordial light flowing inside. Suppress. Lian Han was the fastest to act. Her slender fingers pointed forward as Emperor Intent snaked forward. In the void, a hexagonal ice tower with intense black light fell down and pressed down on Zhang Yi's head. Ice tower. Oh no. Zhang Yi had just repelled Qi Xiaogua, and the injury from the other's punch of the rules had entered his body. Before he could completely suppress it, a terrifying ice prison fell down in an instant. The will of the Great Path mixed with the aura of death spread out. The blood in Zhang Yi's body seemed to be frozen by this will. He knew very well that if he was trapped, the consequences would be unimaginable. There was no other way. He could only endure. Clenching his teeth, Zhang Yi raised his head and roared. The 9 acupoints on his body exploded with even more radiance. With a buzzing sound, a group of mighty battle phantoms expanded, casting a battle phantoms to resist the tower. Do it, Lian Han said. Her emperor intent controlled the ice tower to suppress the battle god phantom. Next, she would let Sikong Shu and Zhongli Qing attack. She wanted to see how this divine general could endure. True Phoenix Heaven Slash. The giant phoenix in the void turned into a ray of sword light and entered Sikong Shu's body. The Supreme Emperor's sword in her hand exploded with unparalleled great path light. She was like a sword, moving with the sword. She turned into a ray of light and pierced forward. Open. The grand mist gourd on Zhong Liqing's shoulder spewed out a tidal wave of water that suddenly appeared beneath Zhang Ye's feet. At the same time, a beam of grand mist light shot forward together with Sikong Shu's sword light. The 3 monstrous geniuses of the Phoenix Flower sect were bound to succeed in one strike and kill this Sunset Peak's divine general. Boom! The terrifying wave gushed up and the Tao power blasted on his body. Zhang Yi felt like he was trapped in a majestic flood. In an instant, he felt a fatal sense of suffocation. His consciousness began to blur. At this time, an ice tower was pressing down on him. The death Tao power seemed to corrode his soul and wanted to freeze his consciousness. In front of him, there were 2 rays of light piercing toward him. Break for me! Zhang Yi roared crazily. Relying on his strong and stubborn will, he forcefully stabilized his consciousness. His 9 palaces battle power was pushed to the limit. His battle Tao body exploded with unparalleled radiance and actually broke through Lian Han's ice tower. In the next instant, 9 rays of sword light bloomed between heaven and earth. The 9 rays merged into one and slashed forward. Chi! The terrifying ray of light pierced through everything. It was just 1 ray of sword light, but it felt like 9 rays of sword light were flying at the same time, cutting through everything. Everything would be shattered under this Tao power. Move! Sikong Shu shouted anxiously. She stopped midway and only had time to push Zhongli Qing, who was beside her, away. Whoosh! In the next second, the ray of light extended past her throat. An imperceptible crack appeared on the Supreme Emperor's sword in Sikong Shu's hand. Although the crack was very small, it was enough to take her life. Senior Sister Sikong. Zhongli Qing's tears flowed like a spring. She watched as a line of blood appeared on Sikong Shu's white neck. Immediately, that line of blood spurted out like a fountain. Sikong Shu's body leaned back, and the hand that was holding the Emperor's sword loosened. She died on the spot. 3 Tao proving the archlords worked together, and one of them died. Zhang Ye's body rapidly retreated, wanting to leave this battlefield. The Sunset Peak's divine general armor on his body had cracked into a net. His organs were in pain as if they were burning. A trace of struggle and regret flashed in his eyes. But immediately, his gaze calmed down again. He was very clear that if he hadn't used his limit just now, he would have been the one to die. He still wanted to continue fighting and see what kind of miracle would happen in the end. Hence, he could only let that phoenix flower fairy down. The Sunset Battle God had said that he could give it his all in this battle and not care about any sacrifice or price. Even if he met his loved ones, he could still attack. Since the Sunset Battle God had said so, there must be some meaning behind it. Perhaps those who had sacrificed themselves might not be unable to return. Forcing out Qin Hao's power of the divine Tao and reversing the heavenly Tao's reincarnation cycle, the dead could be revived. I'm sorry. Zhang Yi used one hand to cover his chest that had been hit by Tsiogwa. That wild power was wreaking havoc in his body, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to suppress. He quickly retreated and urgently needed to slow down. However, at this moment, a glaring light suddenly descended from the distant battlefield, directly cutting towards Zhang Ye's path of retreat. Although he didn't have time to see who it was, at this moment, An extremely majestic military aura filled the entire space. It was as if the expert that had descended here wasn't alone but had brought thousands of soldiers and horses behind him. Chapter 1920. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Abandoning the 6 senses and 9 senses. Clang. Zhang Yi turned around and slashed with his Overlord saber. It exploded with an intense Tao intent radiance. The ferocious impact reverberated back, aggravating the nomological injuries in his body. Blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth as he was sent flying thousands of feet away. Qin Yun. Zhang Yi looked at the figure with a solemn expression beneath his helmet. He was about the same height as Qin Hao. The Overlord halberd in his hand emitted an intense murderous glow. It was none other than Qin Yun. I don't care who you are. Since you have been stained with the blood of Fairy Fenghua of the North, you have to pay the same price. Qin Yun's eyes flickered with intense killing intent. He felt pain and disappointment in his heart. He looked at Zhang Yi, who was wearing the Setting Sun Peak's divine general armor, and tightened his grip on the Overlord halberd. That will depend on your ability, Zhang Yi said coldly. He slashed out with his Overlord saber, sweeping out a ferocious storm of saber chi that shot towards Qin Yun like a whirlwind. Qin Yun's eyes flickered with a sharp luster. The Overlord halberd in his hand was replaced by the resplendent Xianyuan halberd that was pure gold. Immediately, a monstrous Tharch light erupted. His 9 palaces acupoints opened as he stabbed forward with his halberd, spewing out a blinding flood of light. In this flood of light, an iron-blooded army appeared out of thin air. War chariots rumbled as they crushed the void. Countless cavalrymen on war horses formed a battle formation and charged forward with spears in hand. At that moment, Qin Yun was like a commander standing behind an iron-blooded army. Back then, Qin Hao had given him the power of the guardian statue in front of the buried god palace, allowing him to possess the war god's laws. This Tao intent power was extremely powerful. Dong, dong, dong. The sound of war drums reverberated through the world. It came from the iron-blooded army that crushed the void. It shook Zhang Ye's soul as his blood churned. He saw the storm of saber chi sink into the Tao intent army, shattering countless war chariots. However, the might of the army was too powerful. With the support of Qin Yun's Tao, the army appeared endlessly. The Overlord halberd. Translation. 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 As translation. 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 Zhang Yi laughed sorrowfully. Even if he wasn't injured, he might not be a match for Qin Yun when facing such a Tao inside attack. What's more, Zhang Ye's Tao intent was depleted, and there were still nomological injuries in his body. It was even more impossible for him to defeat this personal disciple of the war supremacy from the Mizar Peak. Retreat. Zhang Yi retreated rapidly towards the War Immortal Guard army without any hesitation. Zhang Yi did not wish to die under Emperor Xuanyuan's halberd. Regardless of whether it was the Tao intent or the weapon that Qin Yun wielded, they were all specially equipped by Qin Hao, allowing Qin Yun to unleash his innate talent to its limit. On the other side, in the void far away from the vast battlefield of Sunset Peak, here 2 rays of light that contained supreme divine power interweaved, forming an awe-inspiring domain of the great Tao. A gigantic heaven and earth chessboard spanned across space. The crisscrossing chessboard emitted a terrifying nomological glow. Black and white chess pieces landed on the intersection points of the chessboard. With Ning Tianqing as the core, they formed the 4 divisions and 9 palaces, suppressing everything within the chessboard. Ning Tianqing sat cross-legged in the middle of the chessboard. The sound of the zither flowed beneath his palm. Musical notes danced with his 10 fingers, forming a tune of the great Tao. Countless tall demon spirits wielding black scythes were born within the chessboard, dancing to the tune. On the other side of the chessboard, the great Zhou prince, Zhou Wudao, crossed his arms and floated in the air. A pair of gigantic pitch-black demon wings gently flapped behind his back. Endless demon aura lingered around him as the power of the great Tao of fiend gods filled the space. His expression was very relaxed, as though he was not affected by the heavenly demon's song at all. Seeing Ning Tianqing, who was focused on playing the zither, Zhou Wudao slowly smiled. The demon spirits within the chessboard were controlled by the tune to attack him. Every time they approached, the demon spirits wielding death scythes would transform into wisps of gentle demon aura that gathered around Zhou Wudao's body. Following this, the demon aura that emanated from him became more and more intense. This scene was very strange. It was as though the two of them were not fighting. It was more like Ning Tianqing was playing a tune for Zhou Wudao to strengthen the power of the demonic way, using the tune to nourish his will of the demon god. "Are you still not willing to give up?" Zhou Wudao asked. Before coming to Sunset Peak to fight, Qin Hao had privately told him that it was fine if Ning Tianqing did not use the heaven and earth chest. Once he used it, he would be controlled by the implement spirit and temporarily lose part of his talent. For example, his power of the phantom fox. The heaven and earth chess was indeed extraordinary, but all of this had to be done according to the will of the implement spirit. Ning Tianqing himself could not control the divine implement, so no matter what emperor technique he practiced, it was only a divine performance in the rules of the chessboard. Therefore, they only needed to fight to see whose rules were stronger. Zhou Wudao had inherited the power of the 10 puppet demons. Qin Hao estimated that it would not be easy for Crown Prince Wu Ning to win this battle based on the situation between him and Ning Tianqing. In fact, it was not only not easy, it was far beyond Qin Hao's expectations. Zhou Wudao was not affected by the heavenly demon's song when he was immersed in the chessboard. Instead, the song that confused his mind became a tonic for him. The demonic way aura condensed from the Tao will was constantly being absorbed by the 10 puppet demons' power of the demon god. Now you should know that this song can't affect me. The Tao of laws contained in the implement spirit can't suppress me either. You have no chance of winning in this chessboard, Zhou Wudao said lazily. There was a faint disappointment in his voice. He thought that he could have a good contest with the arrogant Crown Prince Wu Ning. In the end, this was it? Not necessarily. Ning Tianqing did not stop playing. He knew very well that if he could not win by relying on the heaven and earth chess, then he was no match for Zhou Wudao without using the implement spirit's rules. Under the rules were ineffective. As long as he left the chessboard, even if he had 9 lives, he would not be able to withstand the destruction of Zhou Wudao's demon god power. Indeed, he might lose this battle again. He did not expect Zhou Wudao's demonic will to be so terrifying that it was even more difficult to deal with than Qin Hao's. However, as long as there was a glimmer of hope, Ning Tianqing would not give up. He wanted to see how long Zhou Wudao could absorb it. Both sides had not completely controlled the power of the divine path, and the prince of the great Zhou should have a limit. As a result, the battle here was exceptionally calm. Compared to the tragic battle at Sunset Peak, the two people in the chessboard, one was diligently playing the guqin, and the other was leisurely listening. Zhou Wudao was arranged by Qin Hao to contain Ning Tianqing. He thought that an unprecedentedly fierce battle of the divine path would break out, but it turned out that he was the most relaxed of all. Boom! In a vast and boundless world light of the great path, the red lotus flames in Qin Hao's body roared, and he collided with the sunset battle god's palm. Terrifying particles of fighting will swept up flames from their palms. Both of them stood still like pillars, and neither of them moved an inch. "You've recovered to your peak?" Zhan Wu asked, slightly surprised. The will of the Emperor contained in this palm was not weaker than his. It was at the peak of unblemished perfection, and was not much different from Qin Hao's state when he broke into the valley of the burial of the gods. Not yet, Qin Hao said. In that peak, there is a will of the Emperor from my previous life. Your memory is not bad. Zhan Wu smiled. Likewise. Your will of the Emperor from your previous life happens to be suppressed by part of my fighting will. If you want to take it out, you have to defeat me first. Zhan Wu also did not have a complete body of the will of the Wei. That depends on how much you've mastered the sunset archery technique. Beams of golden light shot out from various parts of Qin Hao's body. Under the operation of the Emperor's technique, the 9 palace acupoints spewed out extremely vigorous dilli, flowing along the meridians. In an instant, the dilli increased greatly, and the red lotus flames under his palm exploded, sending Zhan Wu flying. I will definitely not disappoint you. Zhan Wu's body slid back for some distance, and he quickly steadied himself. His fists flashed with dense particles of fighting will. He roared and blasted a blazing fist of fighting will forward. Qin Hao did not need to be restrained. He stepped forward, and scales grew out, covering his fists and cheeks. With every step he took, his body grew taller and stronger. Then he raised his hand and grabbed forward. There was a deafening explosion, and the dazzling particles of fighting will were shattered in his palm. Boom! Qin Hao was sent flying forward with a kick, and he punched Zhan Wu again. I haven't seen you in 600 years, and you've become like a beast. Zhan Wu seemed to be well aware of Qin Hao's talents and martial arts techniques in this life. He knew that by opening the power of the dragon and layering the imperial methods of the divine palace, Qin Hao's will of the Wei at this moment was absolutely terrifying among the unblemished imperial paths. It was not much worse than nirvana. Not daring to be careless, Zhan Wu stepped back, steadied himself, and crossed his arms to protect himself. Boom! There was an incomparably violent sound of a heavy blow. Even though he was prepared, Qin Hao's punch was still stronger than expected. Zhan Wu's body involuntarily flew back again, and his 2 feet drew a dazzling luster in the air. His internal organs were almost shaken. It hurts. Qin Hao knocked back the sunset battle god with a punch, and his scale-covered fist felt pain that he had not felt in a long time. He looked forward and found that Zhan Wu's mighty armor was rippling, as if it was an array. My armor is very precious, and there are few in the Emperor realm who can break it. Based on your ability, if you want to break my armor, I'm afraid you'll have to take out the red arrow or that cauldron. Zhan Wu retreated dozens of meters before stopping. He rubbed the armor on his arm. It really hurt. Qin Hao was actually able to cause Zhan Wu's arms to go numb even though they were separated by a set of divine-grade protective equipment. It seemed like being trapped in the divine wilderness for a period of time had not only weakened the Pill Emperor's strength, it had also weakened him, the battle world's god king. It was all thanks to the group of immemorial gods. Show me your true strength. If you don't enter the heartless, soulless, and senseless state of the honest battle scripture, you won't be able to last long against me, Qin Hao said in a low voice. You know about the honest battle scripture? Zhan Wu's heart suddenly trembled, and his expression was one of surprise. Did Qin Hao remember something? I don't know. You never told me how to cultivate this set of battle intent. Qin Hao only knew the name, and did not know where Zhan Wu learned it from. In his previous life, Zhan Wu also did not reveal the cultivation method to him. But this cultivation method was very domineering. So that's how it is. Zhan Wu thought that Qin Hao remembered something. He let out a long sigh and nodded. That's right. If I don't enter the heartless, soulless, and senseless state and abandon my 6 senses and 9 senses, I won't be able to last long against you. Then, are you ready to receive the battle intent sublimation attack technique? Chapter 1921. Taste, hearing, smell, touch, sight, and perception. He had abandoned the 6 senses. No thoughts, no desires, no heart, no spirit. He had abandoned the 9 senses. This was the highest level of the art of honest battle. He had transformed into an absolute killing machine and could only fight. Tasteless and soundless. Zhan Wu's eyes became sharp and his temperament changed. He clenched his fists and shook them. Strong battle-intent particles appeared. He rushed forward and punched heavily at Qin Hao. Qin Hao's dragon soul power increased, and dragon roars came from his body. He punched out with his scaly fist. The sunset battle god rushed over quickly, but he was sent flying even faster. The 2 fists collided, and 2 terrifying rules of light flashed. Zhan Wu snorted and retreated. The light in his eye rings flashed, and the black pupils disappeared. They condensed into a pair of bright golden eyes, and the focus of the light was even more intense. He had abandoned the sense of sight. He had lost the senses of the naked eye and locked onto his opponent with his battle intent. Everything he saw was more real and clear. Boom! Terrifying sound waves exploded, and the light particles radiated from Zhan Wu's body. His battle intent continued to increase. He and Qin Hao turned into 2 rays of light and flew forward. They collided, and violent roars echoed in this region. He had abandoned the 3 senses and was already able to resist the explosion of Qin Hao's dragon soul. Senseless, colorless, ignorant. Chanting after chanting came out of Zhan Wu's mouth. When one entered the realm of ignorance, one did not know fear, nor did one sense danger. At this moment, the sunset battle god seemed to have transformed into a crazy battle maniac. Every time he threw a punch, the great path would be destroyed in the particles of his fist will. Cracks of light kept appearing in the matrix realm, and countless particles of fighting will seeped out from the cracks. It was almost unable to withstand the explosion of Zhan Wu's will. Gradually, Qin Hao began to struggle in the battle, and then he became weak. Facing Zhan Wu's crazy punches that did not know fear or danger, he became more and more powerless. Boom! Finally, the 2 intertwining lights separated with a loud bang. Qin Hao crashed into the bounded domain. The scales on half of his body were shattered, and his skin was cracked. A patch of watery light quickly covered and nourished him, and his dragon's scales grew back continuously. So strong. Qin Hao could hear the howling of the astral wind in his ears. His body could not stop at all, and he felt intense pain all over his body. In their impression, Zhan Wu was indeed very strong when he was in a frenzy. In their previous life, none of the opponents they had met could last more than 3 breaths under Zhan Wu's attack. In many cases they were killed with a single punch. For this reason, Qin Hao once joked that if there was anyone in the East Continent who could defeat him without using the sunset arrow, it would be Zhan Wu. Who would have thought that the Zhan Wu he faced after his reincarnation was even stronger and crazier than he remembered? No thought. Zhan Wu witnessed Qin Hao being sent flying. The image transmitted back to his mind was very clear. He could even feel the frequency of the serene water while flowing on Qin Hao's body and analyze the extent of his injury. But for Zhan Wu, it was as if he did not feel anything. His breath was getting colder and colder. Swoosh! Zhan Wu disappeared from his original position. In the space, there was a terrifying breath madly approaching Qin Hao. Once he completely abandoned his 9 senses and entered a state of no mind and no spirit, Zhan Wu would no longer be Zhan Wu. Water, wind, divine flash. Not good. The surging danger came at an unimaginable speed. Qin Hao's emperor physique was damaged, and he had lost a lot of energy. He had yet to recover with the tranquil nether water, but Zhan Wu did not give him any chance to catch his breath. If this continued, the person who would not be able to last long in this battle would become the Dan Emperor. Swoosh! A sharp jade-green light flashed through the domain. At the same time, The setting sun battle god that had just arrived in front of Qin Hao was sent flying by a sword strike. A pale white sword mark was immediately branded on his divine armor that glowed with light. Great Void Divine Weapon. Zhan Wu lowered his head and looked at his chest. It could even leave a mark on a divine armor. It was obvious how powerful the sword was. But there was no pain on his face. After abandoning his six senses, Zhan Wu could not feel anything. Huff, huff. Qin Hao floated on one side of the bounded domain, holding the great void divine sword in his hand. He panted heavily and beads of sweat flowed down the scales on his face. It was too fierce. If he did not use the divine weapon, he would not be able to stop Zhan Wu's violent attacks. Qin Hao's 10,000 spirit fire eyes flashed. The flame patterns emitted a sharp light of the great path. He stared at Zhan Wu's divine armor. This armor was definitely not ordinary. In fact, Qin Hao should not have been so strenuous in this battle. Zhan Wu's divine armor had neutralized the power of his Tao. On the other hand, Zhan Wu had been strengthened by the honest battle scripture and could break through Qin Hao's dragon scales. This was the reason why Qin Hao was at a disadvantage. Haha, you took out a divine weapon so quickly. You are weaker than I expected. This is not a good sign. Zhan Wu looked at the mark on his chest. As his palm brushed past, the white mark quickly disappeared. The armor was still as shiny as before. So you also have a divine weapon. Did you get it in the Valley of the Buried God? Qin Hao asked. It was a defensive divine-level protective gear. What difference does it make whether I tell you or not? Next, I hope your nomological laws will not be too disappointing. Zhan Wu snorted coldly. His figure moved forward. Every step he took was as ethereal as a shadow. It was impossible to predict his attack angle. Water-wind steps. Qin Hao gritted his teeth and let go of the divine sword in his hand. A series of cryptic spells came out of his mouth. Buzz! A layer of purple-gold light spread out from the great void sword. In the light, the sword turned into a tripod and revealed its true form. If he wanted to defeat Zhan Wu, it would be difficult to rely on swordsmanship. Qin Hao was naturally best at alchemy, including refining people. He wanted to use alchemy to refine this world and activate the divine weapon to refine Zhan Wu. In an instant, when this layer of purple light that contained the might of the divine path spread out, Zhan Wu's ethereal figure was greatly hindered. The airflow in the domain was chaotic. He could not even step steadily. It was as if there was a gust of wind in front of him. He could not get close to Qin Hao at all. Freeze! Zhan Wu roared. The majestic aura of a god relic spread out from his armor. It resisted the raging airflow in the domain forcefully. It was like a 10,000-year-old giant rock at the bottom of the sea. His body stood firm. Let's see how you're going to settle this, Qin Hao said in a hoarse voice. He clapped his palms in the air. Instantly, the turbulence above the divine great void cauldron became even more violent and turbulent. It was like a whirling blade chopping down. There was a series of clanging sounds as it exploded on Zhan Wu's divine armor. Poof! Zhan Wu's body kept shaking. After holding on for a long time, he could not help but spit out a mouthful of blood. His expression changed a little. This cauldron was a little overbearing. Perhaps its divine will had been weakened too much by time. It could also have been assimilated by the divine land's heavenly Tao. However, Zhan Wu knew that it was more because Qin Hao's alchemy skill was too powerful. After all, he was a primordial alchemist who had established himself in the Archean world. In short, it was a little tricky now. I'll refine your divine armor first. Then I'll refine you. Otherwise, I'll be letting way down. Qin Hao roared. He was extremely disappointed. Zhan Wu really dared to use Uncle Mu to nourish himself. You should be letting yourself down first. Zhan Wu did not bother to talk nonsense. It was useless to say anything to Qin Hao now before he found himself again. Layers of battle spirit light particles kept flowing out of Zhan Wu's body through the godly king armor. They turned into a human-shaped light barrier around him in an attempt to block the divine might of the great void cauldron. Next, the sunset battle god walked toward Qin Hao step by step with bloodshot eyes. Although it was difficult to walk, he did not want to fail at the last step and be refined into the cauldron by Dendi. Die! Outside the domain, in the vast battlefield of the Sunset Peak, Ancestor Sea-Treading Sea let out an explosive roar. In front of him, the true self-general of the Sunset Peak, Gu Che, was being crushed by reefs one after another. His body was bent into the shape of a bow, and the sound of bones breaking constantly rang out from his body. It seemed that his spine was being crushed by Ancestor Sea-Treading Sea's will of Tao. He screamed in extreme pain. Boom! Then, Patriarch Sea Treader opened his palms wide. One seal after another circled around him, exuding the power of the sea. He pointed a finger forward, and the seals flew out in a single line, bombarding Gu Che's body and piercing through his back. No! Gu Che screamed in terror, echoing throughout the battlefield. As dozens of reefs came crashing down from above, his body exploded with a bang, turning into a thick splatter of blood that vanished into the void. Gu Che, the divine general of Sunset Peak, had fallen. Perhaps even Gu Che himself did not think that he would die in the moment of his death. Phew! Patriarch Sea Treader breathed a sigh of relief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Gu Che was a true self-great emperor after all, and his talent was not lacking. If not for his shallow cultivation, it would have been hard to say who would have won. But in the end, Patriarch Sea Treader had won. Patriarch Sea Treader sensed that Gu Che's aura had completely dissipated, and his spirit had melted away as well. He glanced at the realm light that enveloped Qin Hao and the sunset battle god, and a trace of worry flashed through his eyes. He didn't know to what extent Dendi and the battle god had fought in the realm light, and whether or not they had the upper hand. Unfortunately, Patriarch Sea Treader couldn't see through the realm light, so the next thing he could do was continue to expand the advantage of the Northern Territory Army and kill the other Sunset Peak divine generals. Old geezer Wea, you can't hold on any longer. Hurry up and die. At the same time as Gu Che's death, Patriarch Wea, who was being attacked by Lame Hu, sect leader Su, and sect leader Hu, was also in a desperate situation. Ancestor Wea roared again and again. He actually utilized the power of Tao insight to activate the Seal of Mountains and Seas. The Seal of Mountains and Seas transformed into a towering mountain that protected him. He shrank back within it, and traces of panic appeared on his face as he attempted to make a final struggle. It's no use. Look at the power of my immortal sect chest. Lame Hu and the two sect leaders looked at each other. The three of them had a tacit understanding and used the same set of immortal sect incantation at the same time. Buzz! The immortal gate formation chess piece flew over in response, and it started to revolve around the sea of mountains. Strands of ferocious Tao insight energy were like terrifying chisels that chiseled mountain rocks, and they ceaselessly shook out pieces of shattered rocks from the mountain. Sect leader Hu, let's talk things over. In fact, there is no enmity between us. Inside the mountain, Patriarch Wea's expression changed drastically. He abandoned his identity and took the initiative to ask for peace. The strength of the Tao power that erupted from the three true self-great emperors using the same cultivation technique was not something that a true self-great emperor could resist. This time, even the ancestral treasure of the celestial cliffs, the seal of mountains and seas, would not be able to protect him. No enmity, my ass. You just wanted to kill my immortal sect's disciples. I'll end you now. Lame Hu cursed. Did he think that he could sit back and relax just because he joined the Sunset Battle God? Patriarch Wea was such a fool. He really shouldn't have gone against the immortal sect. He dared to endanger the immortal sect. Wasn't he looking down on him and deliberately seeking death? Chapter 1922. Immortal light exploded and swept out in a dazzling manner. Hu Zhu, sect leader Su, and sect leader Hu moved in unison and attacked in the same order. As the immortal light flew out from their hands, surging Tao intent converged on the Tao flag and poured into the Tao flag. Suddenly, the immortal flag bloomed with unparalleled brilliance, flying around the hammock sea peak at high speed, bringing with it sharp rays of the great path. As the rays of light cut through the mountain, the enormous mountain was cut apart layer by layer, continuously disintegrating. Boom! There was a violent explosion. The hammock sea peak shattered. Die! Hu Zhu roared. A huge palm print flew forward, intending to kill Patriarch Wuya. Patriarch Wuya reacted extremely quickly. Taking advantage of the moment when the hammock sea peak collapsed, he turned into a ray of light and fled into the void, abandoning the battlefield. Old man! Hu Zhu's palm strike missed. Looking at the escaping ray of light, he couldn't help but fly into a rage. Patriarch Wuya had actually managed to escape. Buzz! However, at this moment, a dazzling golden light flew out from somewhere in the void. It was incomparably fast, piercing through space and smashing into old ancestor Wuya in a timely manner. The Supreme Emperor weapon contained a monstrous amount of Tao energy, smashing old ancestor Wuya's head into pieces. Instantly, he let out a shrill scream as he clutched his bleeding face. The sword light pierced through Patriarch Wuya's chest with great precision. The surging sword chi crushed the true self-great Emperor's heart, tearing it to pieces along with his divine soul. You! Patriarch Wuya's face was covered in blood. He pointed at the sword emperor in front of him. The one who killed you is Makamanji of the southern region. Makamanji said. He pulled back the Supreme Emperor's sword and waved his hand. The chaotic essence dipper, the ancestral treasure of the martial Ning Empire, flashed across the sky and returned to his palm. He turned and attacked the other battles. Patriarch Wuya was dead. Buzz! 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 The turbulent winds of the great path turned into a vortex that raged between heaven and earth, frantically blocking the attacks from the outside. However, as a white emperor's shadow pierced through, the winds of the great path disintegrated and turned into clouds. Jun Fei Wu Shi, run! Wind Ancestor shouted. Die! The Lord of Azure Island pressed both of his palms down at the same time. Endless torrents rained down, drowning out the Wind Ancestor's voice in the Northern Territories' sea power. At the same time, Emperor Bai, who had broken through the Wind Ancestor's will, returned. His fists landed heavily on the Wind Ancestor's back, causing the Wind Ancestor to spit out blood. The Emperor's body was torn apart by the powerful fist force. The sacred sword Wind People's ancestor had fallen. Patriarch Feng Junfei burst into tears. While defending against Master Wu Wang's attacks, he reached out his hand and grabbed Dilly's shoulder. Then, he threw his son out of the battle. Father! The last thing Feng Gaishi saw was Feng Junfei's body being pierced through by Island Master Wu Wang's Sky Destroyer spear. He was the leader of the South, a powerful cultivator of the Wind People who had the chance to reach the Emperor's path of truth, but he died in the battle at the Sunset Peak. When I return, I will make sure all of you die with the Wind People. Feng Gaishi roared in a hoarse voice. His voice was full of regret. Unfortunately, you won't even have the chance to leave. A wisp of sword intent descended silently, coincidentally appearing in front of Feng Gaishi. A powerful sword intent storm exploded, turning into a sword blade storm that danced in the 9 heavens. It was extremely shocking. It felt like Feng Gaishi had taken the initiative to run into the storm, seeking his own death. It's you. The terrifying sword intent cut into his body, crushing his flesh and destroying his bones. It turned into thousands of sword lights that pierced through Feng Gaishi's divine soul. In front of him, Lin Feng stood there with a blank face, waiting for Feng Gaishi like a fool. Did he regret it? If he hadn't joined forces with Song Yao and deliberately bullied Xiaogua and the Shiliang people, if he hadn't provoked Qin Hao in the god burial ruins, and if he hadn't then, the sacred sword wind people probably shouldn't have ended up like this today. It could only be said that he had brought this upon himself. Amitabha. In the distance, the head of the Vajra Institute, Shirtian Buddhist emperor, looked on helplessly as he witnessed the annihilation of one of the southern border's famous big shots. Even his brothers and sisters weren't able to escape. He couldn't help but sorrowfully recite the name of Buddha, and endless emotions gushed out from his heart. Amitabha. Jia Miao and the other monks chanted Buddhist scriptures to appease the resentment of the thearchs who had fallen in this battle. This battlefield was covered in blood, and as far as the eye could see, it was filled with blood and sin. This was the decline of the martial path, and also the calamity of the divine wilderness. After this battle, it would take thousands of years for the East continent to recover and return to the prosperity of the five realms. But all of this was something that Shirtian Buddhist Tharch, Dean Feng, and the four palace supremacies of Jixia Academy couldn't do anything about. E-book workshop, you want to kill old man? You two are not enough. At the impact zone of the two armies, Xianyuan Wutian of the southern region was extremely arrogant and domineering. He released the great path of gravity and crushed the lava fire spirit, causing the lava flames on his body to become weaker and weaker. Even if Sun God and Holy Emperor Jiang worked together, they couldn't do anything about it. Even the two true self-thearchs showed signs of being at a disadvantage. Boom! A monstrous heavy fist blasted out, and the lava fire spirit, which was already riddled with holes, collapsed. Sun God flew out from the flames in the sky, spitting out a large amount of blood. Holy Emperor Jiang wanted to use the poison path rules to trap Xianyuan Wutian. Unexpectedly, the other party used the great path of gravity to trap Holy Emperor Jiang, turning it into a heavy field. The extremely terrifying rules bombarded Holy Emperor Jiang, causing the top alchemist of the northern border to scream in unbearable pain. Senior Jiang, Sun God shouted hoarsely. He was still too weak. Xianyuan Wutian had stepped into the perfected true self realm 100 years ago, and his cultivation was not below that of Patriarch Ning. He had probably also comprehended a few unblemished paths, but his cultivation was not enough to break through the unblemished path. Now, he and Holy Emperor Jiang had tried their best to suppress the other party, but they were suppressed by Xianyuan Wutian after a long battle. There was really no other way. Boy from the Sage Hall, are you desperate? Then let old man bestow death upon you. Xianyuan Wutian's face was extremely deranged. A large hand released the rules of gravity, as if it was strangling Holy Emperor Jiang's throat from a distance. Then, he punched again, and the terrifying might of the way spread along the void, crushing the bodies of countless war god guards along the way, and bombarding the exhausted sun god. Buzz. However, a vast palm radiance also slapped out from the direction of the yang spirit. Two streams of yellow and white intertwined with each other and collided with Xianyuan Wutian's fist force. Suddenly, the sky collapsed and the earth cracked. Surging light waves of the will of the way exploded, sweeping across an area of hundreds of miles. The space was full of faults. Countless soldiers of the Northland and the war god guards were pulled into the turbulence of space, and no longer had any signs of life. Xianyuan Wutian. A deafening roar appeared above his head. Li Xiusheng descended from the sky. His hands clenched into fists, and he smashed down on Xianyuan Wutian's head. Li Xiusheng, are you here to die as well? Xianyuan Wutian laughed wildly and swung his fist. A ray of dark light shot out and pulled Holy Emperor Jiang, smashing him to the side. Suddenly, his feet shook the air, and he went up against the sky. The dark Emperor's light of true self condensed in his palm, and he slammed it wildly towards Li Xiusheng. Bang! The great path was destroyed. The killing power of the Xianwang mantra turned into an extremely sharp airflow, penetrating the great path rules layer by layer and hitting into Xianyuan Wutian's head. Along with this, the falling sacred statue of Li Xiusheng suffered an extremely terrifying bombardment. Its body instantly flew back, and the two fists that were clasped together were directly shattered in the raging waves of dark light. One was crippled, and the other was dead. Damn it! Xianyuan Wutian's body stabilized in the void. Blood flowed down his forehead. He looked at the hole in the center of his chest that had been eaten by the flames. He could even see his beating heart. But soon, his heart melted, along with his imperial body, spiritual soul, and will, all dissipated from the void. It was as if they had never been in the world. He didn't even have the chance to look at the light that swallowed up Dendi and the Sunset War God. Seniorly, the Sun God attacked and burned Xianyuan Wutian. His body rose and caught the seriously injured Li Xiusheng. Although Ancestor Li had appeared to give Xianyuan Wutian a fatal blow, he had paid the price of two hands. People in the mortal world, as noble as the supreme among the emperors, could not regrow their limbs. Dead. Ha 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 ha. Xianyuan Wutian, this dog, has looked down on me for a long time. In the end, didn't he die under the yellow mantra of the Li family? Dendi owes me. Li Xiusheng ignored his bare wrists and laughed heartily. Because his injuries were too serious, he fainted in the arms of the Sun God. The rules are eroding his internal organs. Under the investigation of the Sun God Emperor, he found that the meridians in Ancestor Li's body were being invaded by a layer of overbearing black will. This was the rule that Xianyuan Wutian had broken into Li Xiusheng's holy emperor body. Ancestor Li's cultivation was profound. Although the invasion was not too fast, it would definitely not last long. Holy Emperor Jiang flew over, clutching his throat. He shook his head at the Sun God without looking. Xianyuan Wutian's rule was too fierce. He couldn't save him. Qin Hao had to make a move. However, no one knew what Qin Hao's current situation was or whether he could defeat the Sunset War God. The Sun God could only hold the unconscious Ancestor Li and stand in the void with Holy Emperor Jiang, looking at the radiant light of the realm. He hoped that Qin Hao could come out soon. At this time, countless huge gaps and cracks appeared in the realm light. It was becoming more and more broken. Terrifying particles of fighting intent overflowed from it, and it seemed to be on the verge of collapse. However, very soon, some people found that the realm light was being nourished by a majestic divine light. The cracks and holes were gradually being repaired, and the terrifying particles of fighting intent that overflowed were becoming fewer and fewer. This made many powerful figures in the Northland reveal a touch of joy. Although they couldn't see the situation inside, they could feel the will of Dendi and the Sunset War God based on the stability of the realm light. For now, Qin Hao should have the upper hand and suppressed the Sunset War God's attack. Is the War God being suppressed? In the battle, Meng Xiang's tyrannical divine elephant fist shook off Yun Ro. Even he could feel that the War God's aura was shrinking. It was becoming smaller, not weaker. The light of the particles of fighting intent that overflowed from the holes in the realm light just now was more terrifying than when the War God attacked in the past. This proved that the War God's strength had been rising, but he still couldn't break the realm light. Obviously, he was firmly suppressed by Dendi. Could it be that the War God would lose? Chapter 1923. Wulin Chinese Network Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Immemorial Divine Seal. In the vast battlefield that surrounded Sunset Peak, the battle cries never stop. In this battle, The various orthodoxies that formed the North Territory's great army with the 9 branches of the Phoenix Flower sect sent cultivators who were all above the level of Renhuang. They ranged from overlord forces to second- and third-rate sections. There were tens of thousands of them, including almost half of the Renhuang in the East Continent. Currently, other than the 4 unblemished Immortal Marshal Hall and the Sunset Peak Commander Kuei-han, the North Territory gradually gained the upper hand in the battle against the True Self Realm and the Martial Emperors below Dao Validation. With the death of the Wind Ancestor, Ancestor Wuya, Xianyuan Wutian, and many Sunset Peak Divine Generals, the North Territory's advantage became more and more obvious. There were signs of victory. Meng Xiang didn't know why the God of War started the battle. He was worried about Dendi, but he didn't hesitate to gamble with the War God Temple, using the geniuses of the East Continent to pave a path of death. Meng Xiang faintly felt that this might have something to do with the divine path. Could it be that the Sunset God of War was forcing Dendi to become a god? Meng Xiang couldn't be sure, but it was too cruel and cold-blooded to become a god in this way. The 30,000 war god guards and divine generals of Sunset Peak all became sacrifices of the divine path. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight with everything he had until he saw the truth of the world. Meng Xiang roared and strode forward with his sturdy body. He stared at Yun Ro and punched forward, bursting with divine elephant fist will. Elephants trumpeted in the sky. Between him and Yun Ro, only one was qualified to see the truth. Yun Ro's face was pale. Compared to when she first arrived at Sunset Peak, she was much paler. Meng Xiang's punches were ferocious, and his will was as stable as a mountain. He was a very difficult opponent to deal with. Fortunately, she didn't have to fight alone. At this time, Yun Ro began to retreat quickly, as if she was avoiding Meng Xiang's attack. It just so happened that at the same time, a beam of imperial radiance descended from the sky, and it stood between the dark elephant and Yun Ro. Peerlessly dazzling light bloomed out and condensed into a 9-level divine pagoda. The divine pagoda shot forward explosively while emanating surging Dao insight laws, and it collided with an enormous elephant that crushed through space. Instantly, both the divine pagoda and the enormous elephant were actually obliterated at the same time. Meng Xiang let out a muffled groan as his body swayed. He stared straight ahead and said, "Jin Chen." Was Yun Ro pretending to be weak to make him careless? Now's the time. Yun Ro shouted. Her body exploded with the radiance of the celestial flower spell. Her 5 fingers were as hard as steel as she waved them forward, shooting out 5 flower-plucking hand imprints. These hand seals turned into 5 layers of claw lights and flew forward, striking onto Meng Xiang's body in the blink of an eye, grabbing onto his wrists, ankles and throat respectively. Meng Xiang spread out his 4 limbs in the shape of the Chinese character, and was caught in the air. Meng Xiang, you're finished. Jin Chen's figure appeared, wearing the unique red armor of the West Kingdom warring states. His hands dragged the domineering dragon's sword that he had obtained from the sword city of the ruins, dragging a trail of sparks from the void, as he slashed towards Meng Xiang's imperial body with all his might. Just the 2 of you? Meng Xiang's eyes were hazy with a layer of blood. His 4 limbs and throat seemed to be tightly gripped by someone. Blue veins protruded from his neck as an extremely violent elephant cry came out from his body. It was like a trapped divine elephant that wanted to break out of the cage. Just as Jin Chen rushed over, there was a violent sound in the void. Countless elephant shadows rushed out from Meng Xiang's body. His wrists, ankles and throat made cracking sounds as if chains were being broken. He forcibly broke free from Yun Ro's restraint. He roared as endless light shrouded him. Meng Xiang seemed to have turned into the king of 10,000 deities and crashed towards Jin Chen. Die. Jin Chen's domineering dragon blade that was dragging in the void slashed up diagonally, exploding with boundless sword-will radiance. It slashed viciously on the elephant shadow, splitting a huge gash in Meng Xiang's body. Between heaven and earth, there was a tragic elephant cry. Then, Jin Chen's entire body flew backward. The armor in front of his chest was completely shattered. He let out a furious roar as he fell towards the foot of the sunset peak. Suddenly, the earth shook and the mountains shook. Whoosh! A ray of sharp light penetrated Meng Xiang's back. The killing light that contained the rules of the great Emperor of True Self shattered his divine general armor, pierced his heart and went through his chest. Puff! Meng Xiang raised his head and spat out boiling hot blood. Countless elephant cries resounded between heaven and earth. The will of the way that he exuded became weaker and weaker until the imperial light around him dimmed. His messy hair washed away his helmet. Not just the two of them. Zhou Wendi of the great Zhou Empire gritted his teeth at Meng Xiang. His trembling hand held the Emperor's soul Qianqiu brush. This attack was to avenge the fallen great Zhou. For the aristocratic families and officials of the imperial city. For the dignity of the great Zhou tribe. Meng Xiang should die. Zhou Wendi. Meng Xiang's face was full of pain, but there was no trace of regret in his eyes. Destroying the great Zhou Empire and massacring the city was the order of the god of war. He was just following orders. What was there to regret? At this point, Meng Xiang's head slowly turned and looked at the world light of the great path. In the end, he did not make it to the end. Was he not destined to witness the truth and the miracle? Meng Xiang's sorrowful laughter came out of his mouth. With a huge sword wound in his chest that was so deep that his bones could be seen, and his imperial heart that had been pierced and destroyed, he fell towards the foot of the sunset peak. His life was worth it. He had once been glorious. But he did not know if the god of war could make it to the end. Would he be able to leave with no regrets like him? Whoosh! Jin Chen's figure rose from the sky. Half of his armor was shattered. He caught Meng Xiang's body. Looking at the fallen commander Luo, his gaze was complicated. He said, "Bury him. Meng Xiang is a real man." Zhou Wendi's face was full of hatred. His mouth opened several times, but in the end, he did not say anything. "It's up to you," Yunro said. If Jin Chen did not say to bury him, the battle at the Sunset Peak was so tragic that Meng Ju would not be able to leave his body intact. In the next moment, the three of them looked at the world light. The situation was stable. The 30,000 divine guards had suffered heavy casualties. More than half of the divine generals had died in battle. The remaining ones were all injured. They were like cornered beasts and could not struggle for long. Now, they just had to wait for the result of Dendi and the Sunset Battle God. Buzz buzz buzz. Waves of powerful divine aura rushed out. In the world light, although Zhan Wu was trapped in Qin Hao's rules, he did not stop. He was approaching with difficulty. "Can you still hold on like this?" Qin Hao's expression was slightly bitter. The indestructible samsara technique resonated with the great void cauldron. Like a god in the world light, layers of ferocious divine power of rules intertwined. "You've waited for 600 years. I've also waited for 600 years. How can we stop?" Zhan Wu said in a hoarse voice. The battle intent particles that filled the divine armor on his body were not weak at all. Moreover, with the improvement of the honest battle scripture, the burst of battle intent and belief became stronger and stronger. Even the rules of the divine path could not stop Zhan Wu's footstep. "Then you can go to hell," Qin Hao shouted in a hoarse voice. The will of the emperor roared and radiated, invading every inch of space. His palms danced, drawing out a force that could topple mountains and overturn seas. The turbulent flow of rules turned into a gust of wind that swept toward Zhan Wu's body. It lifted him into the air bit by bit and was sucked into the opened cauldron. He wanted to use the cauldron to seal Zhan Wu and refine him. The Way of the Gods. Zhan Wu's face showed a rare ripple of emotion. There was a hint of surprise and excitement in his eyes. Did he remember? This was the immemorial divine sealing technique, the Abhijna of the alchemy venerables. Qin Hao had used the divine sealing technique. No, he didn't get his memories back. It's just his instincts. Zhan Wu realized that Qin Hao's eyes were only filled with killing intent. It was the madness of wanting to destroy the enemy by any means necessary. It was not the memories of his first life. The sunset battle god's body was pulled up bit by bit, and the torrential flow of laws scraped against his body. The godly king armor on his body dimmed for the first time, and he felt an unparalleled divine might wrap around his body, slowly pulling him into the cauldron. No. Once he was sucked in, even though he was the first battle god of the ancient battle world, Zhan Wu did not have the confidence to survive. At this moment, a ray of green light was born in the bounded domain. It was awakened from Zhan Wu's body. The light became more and more dazzling until a navy blue arrow flew past and shot toward the great void cauldron. Hong Hong. Qin Hao was shocked. It was the sunset arrow. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.